Good evening, and welcome to Easy Drift Sleep. Tonight your story takes you to Paul's shipwreck at Malta, a world full of quiet wonder. Before we begin, if you find rest here, subscribing means a new story is always waiting for you. Now close the day behind you, and let us begin. The late autumn sun, a pale, tired orb in the vast, cerulean sky, cast long, wavering shadows across the ancient harbour of Fair Havens. A gentle breeze, almost a sigh, stirred the surface of the water, coaxing the anchored ships to rock with a slow, rhythmic grace. The air, crisp and clean, carried the faint, mingled scents of salt, drying fish, and the sweet, resinous aroma of pine from the distant Cretan hills. It was a place of temporary respite, a small, unassuming cove on the southern coast of the island, offering a brief sanctuary from the unpredictable temperament of the Mediterranean. On the deck of a large Alexandrian grain ship, bound for Rome, Julius, a centurion of the Augustan cohort, stood with his arms crossed, his gaze sweeping over the tranquil scene. His bronze armor, though meticulously maintained, bore the honorable scars of many campaigns, its polished surface reflecting the subdued light of the afternoon. His face, etched with the lines of command and experience, held a neutral expression, yet his eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed little. He was responsible for a contingent of prisoners, including a man named Paul, whom he had been tasked to deliver to Caesar. Julius had already observed something different about this particular prisoner, a quiet dignity and an unusual depth of character that set him apart from the common criminals he usually escorted. Beside him, Luke, a man of gentle demeanor and keen observation, leaned against the railing, a small leather-bound scroll and stylus clutched loosely in one hand. His eyes, thoughtful and empathetic, absorbed every detail of their surroundings, from the bustling activity on the quay to the distant, shimmering outline of the mountains. He was Paul's devoted companion, a physician by trade, but also a meticulous chronicler, his mind constantly sifting through events, seeking to understand and record. He felt the subtle shift in the air, a whisper of unease that belied the present calm, and a quiet apprehension began to settle in his heart. The ship itself was a formidable vessel, designed to carry a vast cargo of wheat from Egypt to the hungry maw of the Roman Empire. Its single, massive mast towered above them, its furled sail a silent, expectant presence. Below deck, the hold was filled with the earthy scent of grain, a heavy, pervasive aroma that spoke of sustenance and distant lands. But even here, in the relative safety of Fair Havens, a tension simmered among the crew and passengers. The sailing season was drawing to a close, and the sea, as all seasoned sailors knew, was about to enter its most tempestuous mood. Earlier that day, a council had been held. Paul, despite his status as a prisoner, had been invited to offer his counsel, his voice resonating with an authority that transcended his chains. He had spoken with a quiet conviction, his words carrying the weight of a premonition, a deep-seated certainty born not of maritime experience, but of an inner knowing. "Sirs," he had warned, his gaze steady and unwavering, "I perceive that this voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." Julius had listened intently, his military mind weighing the words. He had seen enough men with a sixth sense for danger to give Paul's warning serious consideration. There was no hysteria in the man's voice, only a profound, almost sorrowful, certainty. Yet, The centurion was bound by protocol and the practical realities of the voyage. He was a soldier, not a sailor, and the ultimate decision lay with those who commanded the vessel. The ship's owner, a portly man with a florid face and an air of self-importance, had scoffed openly at Paul's words. He was a businessman, driven by profit and the timely delivery of his valuable cargo. The captain, a weather-beaten man whose life had been spent battling the whims of the sea, had also dismissed the prisoner's concerns. Fair Havens, while offering shelter, was not an ideal winter harbor. Its facilities were meager, its provisions limited. A few more days of sailing, they argued, would bring them to Phoenix, a much larger and more comfortable port further west on Crete, where they could safely winter. The allure of better amenities, of a more profitable layover, outweighed the intangible dread that Paul's words had stirred. "The harbor is not commodious to winter in," the captain had declared, his voice gruff, his eyes scanning the horizon with a practiced eye for the weather. "Phoenix is much better situated, facing southwest and northwest. We can make it there before the season truly turns." Julius, despite his respect for Paul, had ultimately deferred to the expertise of the sailors. It was a logical decision, grounded in practical considerations and the prevailing wisdom of those who understood the sea. He had watched Paul's face as the decision was made, seeing not anger or frustration, but a quiet resignation, a deep sadness that seemed to foretell an inevitable tragedy. Now, as the sun dipped lower, painting the western sky in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple, the order to prepare for departure rippled through the ship. The gentle breeze, which had felt so benign earlier, seemed to pick up a subtle edge, whispering of change. The sounds of the harbor, once a comforting murmur, began to take on a sharper, more urgent quality, the creak of ropes, the shouts of the crew, the rhythmic thud of feet on the wooden deck. Luke felt a shiver trace its way down his spine, a premonition that mirrored Paul's. He glanced at Julius, who stood impassively, his gaze fixed on the bustling activity. The centurion's face revealed nothing, but Luke sensed the weight of responsibility that rested upon him. The great sail, once a silent promise, began to unfurl, its vast expanse catching the strengthening breeze with a resounding snap. The ship, a behemoth of timber and canvas, slowly began to stir, its massive hull groaning softly as it pulled away from the safety of the quay. The water, which had been a placid mirror, now churned and frothed at the bow, white foam blossoming against the dark wood. As they cleared the mouth of Fair Havens, the land began to recede, its familiar contours blurring into a distant, hazy line. The gentle breeze, no longer a sigh, began to hum, then to whistle, through the rigging. The ship, once a stately presence, now felt like a fragile shell, propelled by an unseen force into the vast, indifferent expanse of the open sea. The sun, having made its dramatic exit, left behind a sky rapidly darkening, its earlier warmth replaced by a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones. Luke pulled his cloak tighter around him, his gaze sweeping the horizon. The sea, which had seemed so inviting just hours before, now stretched out before them, an endless, undulating canvas of deep, shifting blues and greens. He could almost hear Paul's warning echoing in his mind, a somber prophecy now poised on the precipice of fulfillment. A subtle unease, a prickling sensation on his skin, told him that the tranquil beauty of Fair Havens was already a distant memory, and the true character of the autumn sea was about to reveal itself with a terrifying, relentless fury. The journey to Phoenix, which had seemed a sensible, even desirable, decision, now felt like a desperate gamble against the very elements. And as the ship plunged deeper into the gathering twilight, a profound sense of foreboding settled over the vessel, a silent acknowledgement of the perils that lay ahead. The twilight that had gathered over the vessel, heavy with a profound sense of foreboding, did not linger long in its subtle menace. It was as if the very air had been holding its breath, waiting for the sun to dip below the horizon, before unleashing a primal, untamed wrath upon the unsuspecting ship. The gentle swell that had lulled them into a false sense of security quickly transformed into a churning, mountainous chaos. A low, guttural growl began to emanate from the north, a sound unlike any they had heard before, not the familiar shriek of a squall, but a deeper, more ancient voice rising from the depths of the sea itself. It started as a distant murmur, a whisper carried on the increasingly agitated breeze, then rapidly escalated into a deafening roar that swallowed all other sounds. This was no ordinary storm. This was the Euroclydon, the northeaster, a cyclonic windstorm of legendary ferocity, known to sailors as the bane of the Mediterranean. The ship, a sturdy Alexandrian grain vessel, groaned in protest as the first true blast of the Euroclydon struck it with the force of a battering ram. The mast, which moments before had seemed an unyielding column, now whipped and swayed with terrifying violence, the rigging singing a high-pitched, desperate lament as the wind tore through it. Sailors, hardened men accustomed to the caprices of the sea, scrambled across the pitching deck, their faces etched with a dawning horror. They shouted orders that were immediately snatched away by the gale, their voices rendered impotent against the overwhelming clamor of the storm. Julius, the centurion, stood braced against the mainmast, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his gladius, though he knew it offered no defense against this enemy. The wind tore at his cloak, whipping it around him like a wild thing, and the spray, icy cold and stinging, lashed his face with relentless ferocity. He had faced countless battles on land, seen the chaos of war firsthand, but this was a different kind of adversary, one that could not be outmaneuvered or fought with steel. His weathered face, usually impassive, now showed a flicker of genuine alarm as he watched the massive waves begin to rise around them, dark and towering, like liquid mountains intent on swallowing their fragile craft whole. The ship was no longer sailing, it was being tossed, a mere toy in the colossal hands of the storm, thrown from one crest to the next with bone-jarring force. Below deck, the scene was one of rapidly escalating pandemonium. The air, already thick with the scent of fear and stale seawater, grew heavy and suffocating. The rhythmic crash of waves against the hull, which had been a distant rumble, now became a terrifying, percussive assault, each impact vibrating through the very timbers of the ship, threatening to tear it apart. The faint smell of rotting provisions, a constant companion on any long voyage, was now overwhelmed by the acrid stench of vomit and human terror. Luke, ever the physician, moved through the cramped, swaying hold with a surprising agility, offering what comfort he could. He helped a seasick soldier find a cleaner corner, offered a calming word to a weeping woman, and checked on the shackled prisoners, many of whom were now retching uncontrollably. His own stomach churned with a nauseating rhythm, but he forced himself to remain outwardly calm, his steady presence a small anchor in the rising tide of fear. He watched Paul, who sat quietly amidst the chaos, his eyes closed, his face serene even as the ship bucked and groaned around them. A strange, unshakable peace seemed to emanate from the apostle, a stark contrast to the palpable dread that gripped everyone else. Luke wondered at it, this profound calm in the face of such overwhelming peril, and found a measure of his own courage in observing it. On deck, the sailors were fighting a losing battle. The captain, a burly man with a permanent squint from years of staring into the sun, bellowed orders that were lost in the shriek of the wind. They tried to turn the ship, to head into the wind, to gain some measure of control, but the Euroclydon was too powerful. It seized the vessel, spinning it around, driving it relentlessly before its fury. The steering oars, massive timbers that had guided them across calmer seas, were rendered useless, lifted clear of the water by the mountainous waves, then slammed back down with splintering force. "We must undergird the ship," a sailor screamed, his voice hoarse with exertion and fear. Julius understood the desperate measure. Ropes passed under the hull and tightened across the deck to prevent the timbers from springing apart under the immense strain. It was a last resort, a testament to the storm's unprecedented violence. He watched as men, risking life and limb, were lowered over the sides, battling the raging water, their bodies dwarfed by the colossal waves, struggling to secure the massive cables. The sight was terrifying, a raw display of human vulnerability against the boundless power of nature. The ship was now completely at the mercy of the storm, driven westward, away from any known course. The sun, when it had risen at all in the preceding days, had been a pale, watery ghost, quickly swallowed by the oppressive, leaden sky. Now, for days on end, it vanished entirely, along with the stars, leaving them in a perpetual, terrifying twilight. The compass, a rudimentary tool at best, was useless without a clear sky, and the sailors, once confident in their ability to navigate by the celestial bodies, were now utterly lost. Despair began to settle over the ship like a shroud. Day after day, the relentless battering continued. The sound of the wind, a high-pitched, banshee-like wail, never ceased, piercing their ears and their very souls. The constant motion, the violent lurching and plunging, became an agonizing torment. Food and fresh water dwindled, and the cold, damp air seeped into their bones, making rest impossible. Hope, that fragile flame, flickered precariously, threatening to extinguish itself entirely. Julius, despite his military training, felt the gnawing dread in his gut. He saw it reflected in the hollowed eyes of his soldiers, in the strained faces of the sailors, and in the silent, defeated slump of the prisoners. They were adrift, completely at the mercy of an indifferent sea, with no land in sight, no stars to guide them, and no end to the tempest. He thought of Paul's warning in Fair Havens, how he had dismissed it, choosing the advice of the seasoned captain instead. A bitter taste filled his mouth. Paul had seen this, somehow, had known the true character of this autumn sea. One evening, as the storm raged with undiminished fury, a particularly violent wave crashed over the deck, tearing away the ship's boat, their last hope of escape should the vessel founder. The men watched in stunned silence as the small craft, their only potential lifeline, was swallowed by the churning abyss. A collective groan of despair rose from the crew and passengers. It was a stark, brutal reminder of their utter helplessness. Luke, observing the scene from a sheltered corner, felt a cold dread grip his heart. He saw the light drain from the eyes of the men, the last vestiges of their resolve crumbling. He had seen men die in battle, had witnessed the slow decline of disease, but this was different. This was a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion, where hope itself was the first casualty. He looked towards Paul again, who was now speaking softly to a group of terrified soldiers and passengers. Paul's voice, though low, carried an authority that cut through the din of the storm, a quiet strength that seemed to defy the chaos surrounding them. Luke couldn't hear the words, but he saw the faces of those listening, some looking up with a flicker of renewed attention, others simply clinging to the sound of a steady voice in the maelstrom. Days bled into nights, indistinguishable in the perpetual gloom. The ship, now severely damaged, creaked and groaned like a dying beast. The mainmast had been cut down to lighten the load and prevent it from capsizing, leaving them even more vulnerable. The constant labor of bailing water, of securing loose cargo, of simply trying to stay alive, wore down their bodies and spirits. No one had eaten a proper meal in days, the very thought of food nauseating in the relentless pitching. The despair deepened, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Even the most hardened among them began to give up. Some huddled in silent resignation, others wept openly, believing their end was near. The sea, vast and unforgiving, seemed to mock their every effort, its roar a constant reminder of their impending doom. Julius, leaning against a splintered bulkhead, felt a profound weariness settle over him. He was a man of action, of command, but here he was merely a passenger, a speck of dust on an angry ocean. He closed his eyes, the image of his family, his home, flashing before him, a painful reminder of all he might lose. He wondered if Paul, the prisoner he had been tasked to deliver, held any answers, any hope, in this desolate, storm-ravaged world. The whispers of the Euroclydon were no longer just the sound of the wind, they were the insidious voices of doubt and fear, threatening to consume them all. The whispers of the Euroclydon were no longer just the sound of the wind, they were the insidious voices of doubt and fear, threatening to consume them all. Days bled into nights, indistinguishable in the perpetual gloom that had swallowed the ship. The sun, a distant memory, offered no warmth, no direction, its absence a chilling reminder of their isolation. The ship, once a proud vessel, now groaned and shrieked with every monstrous wave, its timbers protesting against the relentless assault. Water sloshed ceaselessly in the lower holds, a cold, dark presence that seeped into every crevice, chilling bones and extinguishing any lingering warmth. The acrid smell of fear and stale seawater permeated the air, thick and cloying, mixing with the faint, unsettling scent of rotting provisions that had long since been deemed inedible. Julius, the seasoned centurion, found himself clinging to a stanchion, his body bruised and aching from the ship's violent pitching. His worn armor, usually a symbol of his unwavering authority, felt heavy and useless, a cold shell against the gnawing despair. He watched the crew, their faces gaunt and etched with terror, as they battled the elements with a grim, desperate determination. Their initial bravado had long since evaporated, replaced by a hollow-eyed resignation that spoke of lost hope. He had seen men break under less pressure, but this storm, this relentless, howling gale, was a force unlike any he had ever encountered. It whistled through the rigging like a banshee's cry, a constant, piercing shriek that drowned out all other sounds, making communication a futile effort. The rhythmic, terrifying crash of waves against the ship's hull was a constant percussion of impending doom, each impact rattling his teeth and threatening to tear the vessel apart. He saw Luke, Paul's companion, a man of quiet strength, tending to the sick and injured with a physician's calm demeanor, despite the chaos swirling around them. Luke moved with an almost ethereal grace amidst the pitching decks, his hands gentle, his eyes reflecting a deep, unwavering concern. He offered what comfort he could, a steadying hand, a whispered word of encouragement, a small portion of the meager, dry rations that remained. Julius admired his resilience, a quiet strength that seemed to emanate from a source beyond the physical. The ship's captain, a man whose face had once been etched with the confidence of countless voyages, now looked utterly defeated. His eyes, sunken and bloodshot, scanned the horizon with a desperate futility, finding nothing but an endless expanse of churning grey. He barked orders, his voice hoarse, but the conviction had fled, replaced by a hollow echo of his former authority. On the 14th night, as the storm showed no sign of relenting, a new, more terrifying sound joined the symphony of destruction, the splintering groan of the ship's main mast. A collective gasp of horror swept through the beleaguered crew and passengers. The captain, his face ashen, knew what this meant. The ship was taking on water faster than the pumps could manage, and with the mast compromised, their ability to steer or even stay upright was severely diminished. "We must lighten the load," he roared, his voice barely audible above the gale. "Everything overboard. Anything that isn't essential for survival." A frantic, anxious energy swept through the ship. Men, their muscles screaming in protest, began to heave whatever they could into the ravenous maw of the sea. Bales of precious cargo, once destined for distant markets, were unceremoniously tossed over the side, their contents swallowed by the waves. Heavy amphorae, filled with wine and oil, crashed into the churning waters, their contents instantly dispersed. The ship's tackle, ropes, spare sails, even some of the smaller anchors, were sacrificed in a desperate, last-ditch attempt to keep the vessel afloat. Each item thrown overboard felt like a piece of their dwindling hope, a tangible surrender to the storm's overwhelming power. Julius watched, his heart a cold knot in his chest. He saw the despair in the eyes of the merchants, their fortunes disappearing into the depths, yet not a single protest was uttered. Survival had become the only currency. He himself helped to cut loose a heavy coil of rope, his hands raw and bleeding, the salt spray stinging his wounds. The ship, though still battered, seemed to ride marginally higher in the water, a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift that offered a momentary, fragile reprieve. But the relief was short-lived. The storm raged on, relentless and unforgiving. For 14 days and nights, they had eaten nothing, their bodies weakened by hunger and exhaustion, their spirits crushed by the ceaseless terror. Hope had become a flickering ember, threatening to extinguish entirely. Many lay huddled together, their eyes vacant, their bodies swaying with the ship's violent motions, awaiting the inevitable. It was then, in the deepest trough of their despair, that Paul emerged from the shadows of the lower deck. He moved with a quiet dignity, his gaze steady, his presence radiating an unexpected calm that seemed to cut through the pervasive fear. He stood before the terrified crew and passengers, his voice, though not loud, carried an authority that commanded attention, a resonance that seemed to rise above the howling wind. "Men," he began, his voice clear and strong, "you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete, then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss." A murmur of agreement, a collective sigh of regret, rippled through the weary crowd. Many remembered his earlier warning, dismissed by the captain and owner in their eagerness to reach a safer harbor. "But now I urge you to take courage," Paul continued, his eyes sweeping over their gaunt faces, "because not one of you will be lost, only the ship will be destroyed." A ripple of disbelief, then a spark of something akin to hope, flickered through the assembly. Julius, leaning against a splintered bulkhead, watched Paul intently. He had seen men claim divine visions before, usually in moments of weakness or madness, but there was an unwavering conviction in Paul's eyes, a profound certainty that transcended mere human bravado. Paul paused, allowing his words to sink in, then continued, his voice imbued with a quiet power. "Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you the lives of all who sail with you.'" A hushed silence fell upon the deck, broken only by the relentless shriek of the wind. The sheer audacity of Paul's claim, delivered with such calm assurance in the face of such overwhelming peril, was breathtaking. An angel. God. Caesar. The words, spoken in the heart of the tempest, seemed to carry a weight, a truth that resonated deep within their despairing souls. "So take courage, men," Paul reiterated, his gaze firm, "for I have faith in God that it will happen just as He told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island." Luke, standing near Paul, his face illuminated by a faint, ethereal glow from the lantern he held, watched his friend with an expression of profound affirmation. He had witnessed Paul's unwavering faith countless times, seen his resilience in the face of persecution, and he knew, with an unshakable certainty, that these words were not born of delusion but of divine revelation. His heart swelled with a quiet gratitude, a renewed sense of purpose. Paul then reached for a piece of hardtack, a dry, unappetizing biscuit, and broke it. He offered a silent prayer of thanks to God in the presence of them all. Then, he began to eat. The simple act, performed with such grace and conviction, was a profound statement. After 14 days of starvation, of fear-induced nausea, of a complete loss of appetite, Paul was eating. And not just eating, but giving thanks. It was an act of faith, a living testament to his words. Julius, who had felt the gnawing emptiness in his stomach for days, felt a stir of something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hunger. A real, physical hunger, not just the hollow ache of despair. If Paul, a prisoner, could find the strength to eat and give thanks in this maelstrom, then perhaps there was indeed hope. He looked at the other men, their eyes slowly shifting from vacant despair to a flicker of curiosity, then to a tentative, almost fragile hope. "Therefore I urge you to eat something," Paul said, his voice gentle but firm. "For this is for your health, for not a hair of the head of any of you will perish." Spurred by Paul's example, and by the sheer, desperate need for sustenance, the men began to stir. The captain, his eyes still wide with a mixture of fear and dawning wonder, was the first to follow Paul's lead. He took a piece of the hardtack, his hands trembling, and bit into it. The dry, tasteless biscuit had never felt so nourishing, so full of promise. One by one, the others followed. The soldiers, the sailors, the merchants, even the remaining prisoners, all began to eat. There was no feast, no celebration, only the quiet, desperate act of survival, imbued with a newfound, fragile hope. They shared the remaining bread, the dried fruit, the meager rations, each bite a small victory against the encroaching despair. It was a communal act, a shared moment of humanity amidst the inhumanity of the storm. Julius, as he chewed the tough, dry bread, felt a warmth spread through his chilled body, a warmth that was more than just physical. It was the warmth of renewed purpose, of a fragile but tenacious hope. He looked at Paul, truly looked at him, and saw not just a prisoner, but a man of extraordinary conviction, a leader whose wisdom had transcended the immediate crisis. He had dismissed Paul's earlier warning, swayed by the captain's experience, but now, in the face of certain doom, Paul's words resonated with an undeniable truth. The storm still raged, the ship still groaned and shuddered, but something fundamental had shifted. The atmosphere, though still fraught with danger, was no longer one of utter despair. A glimmer of hope, fragile yet resilient, had been rekindled in the hearts of the weary travelers. They were still at the mercy of the tempest, but now they had Paul's promise, an angel's word, and the quiet strength of shared sustenance. They had faced the abyss, and in the darkest hour, a light had appeared, guiding them not out of the storm, but through it, towards an unknown, yet promised, shore. The rhythmic crash of waves against the hull now seemed to carry a different cadence, a beat of endurance rather than impending doom. They would face whatever came next, together, with a newfound, if tentative, resolve. The rhythmic crash of waves against the hull now seemed to carry a different cadence, a beat of endurance rather than impending doom. They would face whatever came next, together, with a newfound, if tentative, resolve. 14 nights had passed since the storm had first seized them, 14 nights of ceaseless, bone-jarring motion, of the ship groaning and protesting against the relentless assault of the sea. For 2 weeks, the sun and stars had remained hidden behind a perpetual shroud of churning grey clouds, leaving them adrift in a world without direction, a world defined only by the towering waves and the howling wind. Each day blurred into the next, marked only by the dwindling rations and the growing weariness etched onto every face. The men, once hardy sailors and seasoned soldiers, had become gaunt shadows, their eyes hollow from lack of sleep and the constant gnawing fear. Then, late on the 14th night, as the ship plunged into a deep trough between 2 monstrous waves, a subtle change rippled through the vessel. It was not a sound, nor a sight, but a feeling, a slight alteration in the way the ship moved, a deeper drag against the water. A veteran sailor, his face a road map of sun and salt, felt it first, a tremor of recognition in his calloused hands gripping the helm. He shouted something unintelligible over the wind, pointing towards the stern. The lead line, a weighted rope used to measure depth, had been cast out countless times over the past weeks, always finding no bottom, always confirming their terrifying isolation in the vastness of the deep. But this time, as the line was hauled back in, the call came, sharp and clear even through the gale, 20 fathoms. A collective gasp, ragged and thin, swept through the men huddled on deck. 20 fathoms. Land. It was a word they had almost forgotten, a concept that felt as distant as the stars. But the relief was quickly overshadowed by a fresh wave of dread. Land in the darkness, amidst a raging tempest, was not a promise of salvation but a harbinger of new, unseen dangers. The thought of striking a hidden reef, of the ship being torn apart on jagged rocks just meters from shore, sent a shiver colder than the sea spray through Julius. He had survived the open ocean only to face a potential, sudden, and brutal end against an invisible coast. Paul, who had been resting below deck, his mind quietly contemplating the angel's words, felt the shift in the ship's motion and the sudden, heightened tension among the crew. He emerged onto the deck, his cloak whipping around him, his gaze sweeping over the anxious faces. He saw the sailors, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror, casting the lead line again. This time, the call came back, 15 fathoms. The depth was decreasing rapidly. They were indeed approaching land, and quickly. The fear of the unknown, of the invisible rocks lurking beneath the churning surface, became palpable. The men, exhausted and desperate, knew that striking a reef in this storm would mean instant destruction. A chilling thought, a desperate measure, began to circulate among the more experienced sailors. They moved with a furtive urgency, their whispers snatched away by the wind. Julius, ever vigilant, noticed the unusual activity. He saw a group of sailors, their faces grim and determined, heading towards the stern, where the ship's small boat, a skiff meant for shore landings or emergencies, was still lashed. Luke, standing near Paul, his own face pale but resolute, followed Julius's gaze. He saw the glint of knives as the sailors began to cut the ropes holding the skiff. Their intention was clear: to lower the small boat, to abandon the larger, doomed vessel, and to make a desperate dash for the unknown shore, hoping to save themselves. It was a primal instinct, a selfish act born of terror, but it threatened to doom them all. If the skilled sailors, the only ones truly capable of navigating the ship, were to leave, the remaining passengers and soldiers would be utterly helpless. Paul, his voice calm yet carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the gale, spoke to Julius. "Centurion," he said, his eyes fixed on the desperate men, "unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." His words were not a plea, but a statement of fact, a stark prophecy delivered with unwavering conviction. He understood the intricate balance of survival, the necessity of every hand, every skill, every ounce of collective effort. The ship, battered and broken, was their only hope, and the sailors were its lifeblood. Julius, a man of action and keen judgment, did not hesitate. He had witnessed Paul's wisdom before, his uncanny foresight, and the quiet strength that had sustained them through the storm. He saw the logic in Paul's words, the cold, hard truth that without the sailors, the ship was a coffin. "Cut the ropes," he bellowed, his voice ringing with military command. "Cut the ropes of the boat and let it fall away." The soldiers, their loyalty to Julius absolute, sprang into action. With swift, decisive movements, they drew their swords and hacked at the thick rope securing the skiff. The desperate sailors, caught mid-act, cried out in protest, but it was too late. With a final, sharp crack, the last rope gave way, and the small boat, their last, desperate hope of individual escape, plunged into the churning black water, instantly swallowed by the waves. It was a brutal, necessary act, a clear statement that they were all in this together, that there would be no individual salvation at the expense of the collective. A heavy silence, broken only by the wind and waves, fell over the deck, a silence of thwarted escape and renewed, grim determination. The night wore on, a relentless assault of wind and spray. The ship continued its inexorable drift towards the unseen land, the soundings growing shallower and shallower. The men, huddled together, shivered not just from the cold, but from the raw, exposed feeling of having their last desperate hope of escape snatched away. They were truly at the mercy of the elements and of each other. As the first faint hint of grey began to paint the eastern sky, promising the dawn, Paul once again emerged from the shadows, his presence a beacon of calm amidst the despair. He looked out at the exhausted faces, the slumped shoulders, the vacant stares. He knew that their bodies were failing, but more critically, their spirits were at their lowest ebb. They had eaten little for days, their stomachs churning with fear and seasickness, their minds consumed by the terrifying uncertainty of their fate. "This is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and taken nothing," Paul began, his voice gentle but firm, carrying to every corner of the deck. "You have eaten nothing." He paused, letting the truth of his words settle. "Therefore, I urge you to take some food. For this is for your health, for not a hair will fall from the head of any of you." He spoke not as a prisoner, but as a leader, a shepherd guiding his flock. His words were a lifeline, a reminder of the angel's promise, a call to practical action that grounded them in the present moment. He understood that before they could face the inevitable shipwreck, they needed physical strength, and perhaps even more importantly, psychological fortitude. A full stomach, even a partially full one, could quell the gnawing fear, restore a semblance of order, and prepare them for the ordeal ahead. Then, in a gesture that resonated with profound meaning, Paul took bread. He held it up, a simple, humble loaf, and in the midst of the storm, amidst the chaos and despair, he gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. His voice, clear and resonant, rose above the roar of the wind, a prayer of gratitude for sustenance, for life, for the promise of deliverance. It was a moment of profound spiritual power, a quiet act of faith that momentarily stilled the tempest in their hearts. He broke the bread, the sound a small, sharp crack in the vast symphony of the storm, and began to eat. His action spoke louder than any sermon. He was not just encouraging them, he was leading by example, demonstrating his absolute trust in divine provision, his unwavering belief in the promise of survival. Slowly, hesitantly at first, then with growing conviction, the men began to stir. The Roman soldiers, accustomed to discipline and following a leader, watched Julius, who nodded his assent. The sailors, their earlier attempt at escape still fresh in their minds, saw the unwavering calm in Paul's eyes. Even the other prisoners, their spirits crushed by weeks of confinement and fear, felt a flicker of hope ignite within them. One by one, they reached for the meager provisions that had been salvaged: a hardtack, dried fruit, perhaps a piece of salted fish. They ate, not with joy, but with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet acceptance of Paul's wisdom. The simple act of eating, of nourishing their bodies, became a shared ritual, a communal affirmation of life in the face of death. It was a moment of profound unity, of shared humanity, as soldiers, sailors, prisoners, and companions all partook of the same humble meal, bound together by the storm and by Paul's unwavering faith. As they ate, a warmth spread through their chilled bodies, a faint spark of energy returning to their weary limbs. The fear did not vanish entirely, but it receded, replaced by a cautious resolve. They were no longer just a collection of desperate individuals. They were a crew, united by a common purpose, strengthened by a shared meal, and guided by a man who seemed to possess an unshakable connection to something far greater than the storm. With the first light of dawn painting the tumultuous waves in shades of bruised purple and angry gray, they could finally see the land. It was a low-lying coast, indistinct in the pre-dawn gloom, but undeniably there. The sight brought a fresh surge of adrenaline, a mixture of exhilaration and terror. They were close, so incredibly close, but the danger was far from over. The ship, now lighter from the jettisoned cargo and the consumed provisions, continued to groan and creak, its timbers protesting against the relentless pounding. The sailors, their bellies now somewhat full, their minds clearer, began to assess the situation with renewed vigor. They noticed a small bay, a cove that offered a slim chance of shelter from the direct force of the wind. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only option. To run aground on the open coast would be certain death. They decided to lighten the ship further, to give it every possible chance of maneuvering into the bay. With a concerted effort, they began to throw the remaining wheat, the last of their cargo, overboard. Sacks of grain, heavy and waterlogged, splashed into the sea, creating a temporary, swirling vortex before being swallowed by the waves. The ship, now significantly lighter, rode higher in the water, a little more responsive to the helm. The wind, however, remained a furious, unyielding force, pushing them relentlessly towards the shore. The waves, though they had lost some of their monstrous height, still crashed against the hull with bone-jarring force. The sound of the surf, a terrifying roar, grew louder and louder with each passing moment, a grim countdown to their inevitable collision with the land. They saw ahead a place where two seas met, a narrow channel or a sandbar, and they decided to run the ship aground there. It was a calculated risk, a desperate attempt to beach the vessel in a way that might allow some to survive. They cut away the anchors, letting them sink into the depths, abandoning any hope of holding their position. Then they unlashed the rudders, which had been secured to prevent damage during the storm, and hoisted the foresail, hoping to catch a gust of wind that would propel them forward, giving them some control over the final, terrifying moments. The ship, now a mere plaything of the wind and waves, surged forward, hurtling towards the shore. The roar of the surf became deafening, a monstrous symphony of impending destruction. The men braced themselves, their eyes wide with fear, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew this was it, the final, terrifying act of their long ordeal. The ship struck, not with a gentle slide, but with a sickening, grinding crash. The bow, driven deep into the sand or mud, stuck fast, immovable. But the stern, still exposed to the relentless pounding of the waves, began to break apart under the immense pressure. Timbers groaned, splintered, and tore away, the sound of destruction echoing over the water. Chaos erupted. The ship was breaking up, disintegrating around them. The men, who had held on for so long, were now faced with the immediate, terrifying reality of the wreck. The waves, no longer just a threat, became a direct, physical assault, washing over the deck, tearing at anything not firmly secured. It was in this moment of ultimate terror that the soldiers, following their grim duty, remembered the prisoners. Roman law was clear: if a prisoner escaped while under a soldier's guard, the soldier would face the same punishment as the escaped prisoner, often death. The centurion's life, and the lives of his men, were on the line. A chilling order began to circulate among them: kill the prisoners, lest any of them swim away and escape. It was a desperate, brutal solution to a desperate problem, a cold calculation to save their own lives. But Julius, the centurion, had witnessed Paul's unwavering faith, his prophetic wisdom, and his calm leadership throughout the storm. He had seen Paul's heart, his care for all on board, and he knew that this man, this prisoner, was no ordinary criminal. He had grown to respect Paul, to trust his judgment, and to believe in the divine protection that seemed to surround him. He could not, would not, allow Paul to be harmed. With a powerful, authoritative voice that cut through the din of the breaking ship and the crashing waves, Julius countermanded the order. "No," he roared, his command absolute. "Spare them. Let those who can swim jump overboard first and get to land." His decision was a radical departure from military protocol, an act of courage and compassion that defied the rigid dictates of Roman law. He was willing to risk his own life, and the lives of his soldiers, to protect Paul, and by extension, all the other prisoners. The soldiers, accustomed to instant obedience, hesitated for only a moment before turning their attention to the new command. The order was clear: save yourselves and help others. Then Julius gave his final instructions, his voice still strong despite the chaos. "And the rest," he commanded, gesturing to those who could not swim or were too weak, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. He urged them to grab hold of any floating debris, any piece of the ship that could offer buoyancy, any plank that could carry them to shore. The men, galvanized by the centurion's decisive leadership and Paul's calm presence, began to act. The swimmers, with a surge of adrenaline, plunged into the churning water, battling the powerful currents, their eyes fixed on the distant shore. Others, seizing broken planks, splintered timbers, or even empty barrels, clung to them with desperate strength, kicking and struggling towards the land. The sea, once their relentless enemy, now offered the very means of their salvation, albeit a treacherous one. The waves continued to crash, the ship continued to break apart, but amidst the destruction, a new energy emerged, a collective will to survive. Each man, whether swimming or clinging to debris, focused on the single, overriding goal: reaching the land, the promised shore. The roar of the surf, which had moments before signified doom, now became the sound of their arduous journey, a powerful, rhythmic reminder of the life that awaited them beyond the tumultuous waters. Paul, his face serene amidst the chaos, found a sturdy piece of timber and, with Luke by his side, entered the water. He did not swim with frantic desperation, but with a quiet, determined stroke, his eyes fixed on the distant, rocky coastline. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that God's promise would hold true. Not a hair would fall from their heads. They would all reach the land. The journey through the churning water was arduous, a battle against the powerful currents and the relentless waves. Men coughed and choked on salt water, their muscles screamed with effort, their minds teetered on the brink of exhaustion. But the sight of the land, growing clearer with each passing moment, fueled their resolve. They were so close, so incredibly close. Finally, one by one, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone, and utterly spent, they began to crawl onto the rocky shore. Some collapsed immediately, too weak to move, their bodies trembling from cold and exertion. Others, with a last surge of strength, helped pull their companions from the grasp of the waves. The beach was a scene of utter exhaustion, of raw survival, but it was also a scene of profound, overwhelming relief. They had made it. All of them. Just as Paul had prophesied, not a single life had been lost. 276 souls, against all odds, had been delivered from the raging tempest, from the depths of the sea, onto the safety of solid ground. They lay there, sprawled on the cold, damp sand, their clothes clinging to their bodies, the roar of the waves still echoing in their ears, but alive. They were alive. As the first rays of the full morning sun broke through the retreating clouds, casting a golden light upon the scene of their miraculous deliverance, they looked around, their eyes slowly taking in their surroundings. They were on an island, a place unknown, but a place of refuge nonetheless. The wind, though still strong, seemed to have lost some of its fury, and the waves, though still powerful, no longer threatened to swallow them whole. A new sound began to reach their ears, a sound that was not of the storm, nor of the sea, but of human voices. Figures began to emerge from the tree line, dark shapes against the brightening sky. They were the inhabitants of the island, drawn by the wreckage, by the cries of the survivors. The islanders, their faces etched with curiosity and concern, approached cautiously, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and wonder. The air, though still carrying the tang of salt and the dampness of the storm, now held a new scent, a faint, tantalizing aroma that promised warmth and comfort. It was the smell of wood smoke, of burning embers, of a fire. The thought of warmth, of drying their soaked clothes, of feeling the heat against their numb skin, sent a wave of longing through the weary survivors. Paul, his strength seemingly undiminished by the ordeal, rose to his feet. He looked at the wreckage of the ship, at the scattered debris along the shore, and then at the faces of the survivors, to soldiers, sailors, prisoners, and his companions. A profound sense of gratitude filled him, a quiet, unwavering certainty in the goodness of God. They had faced the unknown depths, the relentless fury of the storm, and they had emerged, not unscathed, but whole. The islanders, seeing the desperate state of the shipwrecked men, began to move with a quiet efficiency. They were not hostile, but welcoming, their faces softening with compassion. They gestured towards a clearing, where a small fire had already been kindled, its flames dancing merrily in the morning breeze. It was a simple act of human kindness, a beacon of warmth and hospitality in a world that had, for 14 days, been nothing but cold and hostile. The survivors, their bodies aching, their minds still reeling from the ordeal, began to move towards the fire, drawn by its promise of comfort and respite. The crackle of the flames, the warmth radiating outwards, the gentle murmur of the islanders' voices, these were the sounds of salvation, the tangible proof of their deliverance. They had been shipwrecked, yes, but they had also been saved, brought to a place of unexpected refuge, a place of human kindness and divine provision. The journey was far from over, but for now, in the warmth of the fire, surrounded by newfound allies, they could rest and begin to heal. The island, they would soon learn, was called Malta, a name that would forever be etched into the annals of their miraculous survival. The island, they would soon learn, was called Malta, a name that would forever be etched into the annals of their miraculous survival. The first rays of dawn, pale and hesitant, began to pierce the relentless grey of the sky, painting the churning waves with a sickly, metallic sheen. For 14 days and 14 nights, the ship had been a toy in the hands of the Euroclydon, tossed and battered without mercy, every soul aboard clinging to the fragile hope that land, any land, might appear. Now, as the light strengthened, a dark, jagged line emerged on the horizon, a silhouette against the bruised sky, promising both salvation and a final, terrifying trial. A collective gasp, a mixture of relief and renewed fear, rippled through the weary passengers and crew. "Land," someone cried, the word hoarse with disuse, yet carrying the weight of 1,000 prayers. Paul, his face etched with the strain of the ordeal but his eyes still holding a steady, unwavering light, stood near the bow, his gaze fixed on the approaching shore. He had seen this coming, had spoken of it, and now, as the ship groaned and shuddered beneath them, he felt the familiar certainty of divine purpose guiding their desperate maneuvers. The sailors, their faces gaunt and salt-crusted, sprang into action, their movements imbued with a sudden, desperate energy. They began to sound the depths, calling out measurements that echoed eerily over the roar of the wind and waves. 20 fathoms, a voice shouted from the bow, indicating the water was still deep enough. A few moments later, the cry came again, 15 fathoms. The depth was rapidly decreasing, signaling hidden dangers beneath the surface. The captain, a man whose weathered face usually held an air of grim competence, now looked utterly spent, his eyes darting frantically between the approaching land and the ship's groaning timbers. He knew this coastline, or at least, he knew its reputation for treacherous shoals and hidden rocks. His plan, born of desperation, was to run the ship aground, to beach it as gently as possible, hoping the vessel would hold together long enough for everyone to escape. "Cut the anchors," he bellowed, his voice raw. The 4 anchors that had been dragging from the stern, meant to slow their drift, were now a liability, holding them in place too close to unseen dangers. With a series of sharp hacks and groans of metal, the heavy ropes were severed, and the anchors plunged into the depths, their chains rattling a final, mournful song. Next, the sailors hoisted the foresail, a desperate measure to give them some steerage, to point the ship towards a sandy inlet they had spotted, a small indentation in the rugged shoreline that offered the slimmest chance of survival. The canvas, old and stiff, billowed out with a crack like thunder, and the ship, for the first time in days, felt a semblance of direction, albeit a perilous one. The wind, still a furious beast, caught the sail, pushing them forward with terrifying speed towards the shore. Julius, the centurion, stood his ground near Paul, his hand resting instinctively on the hilt of his gladius. His armor, though dented and salt-stained, still conveyed an air of authority, but his eyes, usually so stern, held a flicker of apprehension. He had watched Paul closely these past weeks, seen the calm assurance that had never wavered, even when all hope seemed lost. He had heard the prophecy of salvation, and now, as the land rushed towards them, he felt a strange, unsettling blend of fear and faith. Luke, ever watchful, remained close to Paul, his physician's bag still clutched in one hand, though its contents were likely useless against the fury of the sea. His face was pale, but his gaze, like Paul's, was steady, absorbing every detail, every tremor of the ship. The roar of the waves grew deafening as they neared the shore, a monstrous symphony of destruction. The ship, now moving at a frightening pace, was hurtling towards its final resting place. Suddenly, with a sickening lurch and a sound like 1,000 timbers splintering simultaneously, the ship struck something unseen beneath the water. A violent shudder ran through the entire vessel, throwing passengers and crew off their feet. The bow, driven deep into what felt like a sandbar or a hidden reef, became immovably fixed. The stern, however, remained suspended over deeper water, exposed to the full, unyielding force of the waves. The ship groaned, a living thing in its death throes, and then, with a horrifying, drawn-out shriek of tearing wood, the stern began to break apart. Planks ripped away, beams snapped like kindling, and the relentless wave surged through the gaping wounds, transforming the ship into a watery maw. Chaos erupted. Shouts of terror mingled with the crash of breaking waves and the splintering of wood. The deck tilted precariously, threatening to pitch everyone into the churning sea. Julius, regaining his footing, scanned the disintegrating vessel, his military training kicking in. He saw the panic spreading like wildfire, the raw, primal fear in the eyes of the soldiers and the prisoners alike. He knew that in such moments, discipline could shatter and instinct could lead to unthinkable acts. As the stern continued to disintegrate, a chilling thought, born of Roman military law and the harsh realities of their situation, began to circulate among the soldiers. If a prisoner escaped, the guard responsible faced severe punishment, often death. With the ship breaking apart and the shore still a treacherous swim away, the prospect of prisoners scattering and disappearing into the waves was very real. A grizzled centurion, his face grim and determined, approached Julius, his voice barely audible above the din. "Centurion, the prisoners. We must prevent their escape. They could reach the shore and vanish." His hand went to his sword, and the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air: kill them. Better to execute them now than face the wrath of the emperor for a lost charge. Other soldiers, their faces hardened by fear and duty, began to draw their swords, their eyes fixed on the huddled, terrified prisoners. A wave of cold dread washed over Luke as he saw the glint of steel, heard the low, guttural murmurs among the soldiers. He instinctively moved closer to Paul, ready to shield him. Paul, however, remained calm, his gaze fixed on Julius, a silent appeal in his steady eyes. Julius, his heart pounding against his ribs, felt the weight of the moment. He saw the desperation in his soldiers' eyes, understood their reasoning. But he also saw Paul, the man who had warned them, who had offered hope when all was lost, who had broken bread with them in the storm, and whose God had promised that not a single life would be lost. To kill Paul, to kill any of the prisoners now, after all they had endured, after Paul's unwavering faith, felt like an act of profound betrayal, a defiance of the very providence that had brought them this far. He remembered Paul's words, spoken with such quiet authority, "For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you.'" Julius had seen the truth of those words unfold. He had witnessed Paul's leadership, his compassion, his unwavering faith. This man was no ordinary prisoner. With a sudden, decisive movement, Julius stepped forward, placing himself between his men and the terrified prisoners. His voice, though strained, cut through the clamor with the sharp edge of command. "Hold! No one is to harm the prisoners." His eyes, usually so cold, now blazed with a fierce conviction. "I forbid it! Every man will make it to shore alive. That is the order." His authority, forged in countless campaigns, was absolute. The soldiers hesitated, their swords still drawn, but the order from their centurion, clear and unequivocal, forced them to stand down. Their faces still showed their apprehension, but the immediate threat to the prisoners receded, replaced by the more pressing need for survival. Luke let out a slow, silent breath, his body trembling with relief. Paul offered Julius a small, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the centurion's courage and humanity. "Those who can swim," Julius commanded, his voice now directed at everyone, "jump overboard first and make for the land." The deck was a scene of controlled chaos. The ship was breaking apart rapidly, the stern now a gaping maw of splintered wood and churning water. The waves, relentless and powerful, crashed over the deck, threatening to sweep everyone away. Yet, amidst the destruction, a strange sense of purpose had taken hold. Julius's command, Paul's calm presence, and the sheer instinct for survival propelled them forward. Men and women, their faces pale with fear but their eyes alight with a desperate hope, began to leap into the furious sea. The water was frigid, a shocking embrace that stole their breath, but the promise of land, so close yet so far, spurred them on. They struck out, their arms flailing, their bodies fighting against the powerful currents that threatened to drag them back into the ship's deadly embrace. For those who could not swim, or who were too weak from the ordeal, Paul's earlier words of encouragement echoed in their minds, "Do not be afraid, for not a hair of your head will perish." They looked for anything that could float, any piece of debris from the disintegrating ship. Luke, seeing an old wooden chest floating nearby, grabbed it, offering it to a terrified woman who clung to a broken mast. Paul, ever practical, helped a group of soldiers secure themselves to a large plank, ensuring they had a stable platform to ride the waves. The ship, now little more than a skeletal wreck, groaned its final protest as a colossal wave slammed into its exposed stern, tearing away the last vestiges of its integrity. The deck split down the middle, and the remaining sections, with their clinging human cargo, were swept into the tumultuous sea. The water was a maelstrom of splintered wood, torn canvas, and struggling bodies. The air was filled with the roar of the waves, the cries of the struggling, and the sharp, acrid smell of salt and fear. Yet, amidst this terrifying chaos, a miracle unfolded. One by one, then in small groups, the survivors began to reach the shore. Some, strong swimmers, dragged themselves onto the rocky beach, collapsing in exhaustion, their lungs burning, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. Others, clinging desperately to planks, broken pieces of mast, or any floating debris they could find, were carried by the waves, tossed and tumbled, until they too were deposited on the sand, gasping for air, their faces streaked with salt and tears of relief. Julius, a powerful swimmer, reached the shore and immediately began to organize the survivors, helping those who were struggling, pulling them from the grasp of the retreating waves. His centurion's instincts, honed by years of leading men, took over, even in his own exhaustion. He barked orders, offered encouragement, and ensured that no one was left behind in the surf. Paul, too, emerged from the waves, his robes heavy with water, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. He stood on the shore, his gaze sweeping over the scene, his heart filled with a profound gratitude. He saw Luke, helping a young boy who had been separated from his family. He saw the prisoners, dripping wet but alive, their faces etched with disbelief and immense relief. He saw the soldiers, their initial fear replaced by a quiet awe. As the last few survivors were pulled from the water, the full scope of the miracle became clear. 276 souls, every single one of them, had made it to land. Not a single life had been lost, just as Paul had prophesied. The ship, the mighty Alexandrian grain vessel, was gone, swallowed by the sea, its timbers scattered along the shoreline like broken bones. But its human cargo, against all odds, had been delivered. The sun, now fully risen, broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over the rugged coastline, illuminating the exhausted, shivering figures huddled on the sand. The wind, though still strong, seemed to have lost some of its furious edge, as if the storm itself had exhausted its rage upon the ship. The roar of the waves, though still present, began to recede into a rhythmic, almost soothing murmur. A profound sense of relief washed over everyone, a collective exhale after weeks of holding their breath. They were alive. They were on land. The terrifying ordeal was over. Shivering from the cold and the lingering shock, they looked around, their eyes wide with wonder and a dawning understanding of the extraordinary events they had just lived through. The island, wild and untamed, stretched before them, a promise of shelter and warmth after the brutal embrace of the sea. They were strangers in a strange land, but they were together, bound by the shared crucible of their survival. Julius, his face streaked with salt and exhaustion, approached Paul, a deep respect shining in his eyes. He did not need to speak, his gaze conveyed a profound acknowledgement of Paul's wisdom, his faith, and the undeniable hand of divine protection that had guided them through the impossible. Luke, his physician's instincts already stirring, began to assess the injured, offering what comfort and aid he could. He looked at Paul, then back at the scattered remnants of the ship, then at the faces of the survivors, his mind already beginning to chronicle the miraculous events of these past weeks. This was a story that needed to be told, a testament to faith and divine providence. As the initial shock began to subside, the cold began to truly bite. The wind, though less furious, still carried a chill that seeped into their very bones. Their clothes, soaked and heavy, offered no protection. They huddled together, instinctively seeking warmth from one another, their eyes scanning the unfamiliar landscape for any sign of human habitation, any flicker of hope beyond their immediate survival. The island, they would soon learn, was called Malta, a name that would forever be etched into the annals of their miraculous survival. And on this island, amidst the wild beauty and the lingering chill of the storm, they would find not only refuge but also a profound demonstration of human kindness and divine provision, a testament to the enduring power of hope in the face of overwhelming adversity. For now, however, they simply stood, shivering but alive, on the shore of their salvation, the taste of salt and the miracle of breath filling their weary souls. The relentless, howling gale of the Euroclydon, which had been their tormentor for so many days, had finally begun to recede, leaving behind a profound stillness that felt almost unnatural after the incessant roar of the storm. A heavy mist still clung to the rugged coastline, swirling around the jagged rocks where the ship had met its end, but the sky above was slowly brightening, revealing a bruised, pale dawn. The air, though no longer filled with the biting spray of the sea, carried a damp, earthy scent, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of salt water and the lingering chill of the night. Julius, the Roman centurion, stood amongst the bedraggled survivors, his heavy wool cloak, miraculously salvaged, now draped around his shoulders, offering little warmth against the pervasive cold that seeped into his bones. His gaze swept over the huddled figures, a mixture of soldiers, sailors, and prisoners, all equally humbled by their brush with death. He saw the faint tremors that ran through their bodies, the chattering teeth, the blue tint to their lips, and a deep, primal understanding of their immediate need for warmth settled in his mind. He was a man of action, accustomed to commanding, and even in this desolate state, his instincts for leadership remained sharp. As the first rays of sunlight, weak and watery, pierced through the dissipating mist, a new sound reached their ears, faint at first, then growing steadily clearer, the murmur of voices, speaking in an unfamiliar tongue. From beyond a low rise of scrubby bushes and gnarled trees, figures began to emerge, dark silhouettes against the brightening sky. They were islanders, their faces weathered by sun and sea, their clothing simple, homespun tunics and cloaks. They moved with a quiet efficiency, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and caution as they approached the shipwrecked strangers. One of the islanders, an older man with a kindly, furrowed face and eyes that held a deep understanding of the sea's unpredictable nature, stepped forward. He gestured towards the shivering group, then towards a clearing a little further inland, where the ground was flatter and offered some shelter from the lingering wind. His voice was guttural but gentle, and though his words were incomprehensible, his intent was clear. He offered aid. Luke, Paul's loyal companion, watched the scene unfold with a physician's keen eye, noting the islanders' healthy, robust physiques, their simple tools, and the quiet dignity with which they extended their hospitality. He felt a surge of gratitude, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with physical heat. He turned to Paul, who stood a little apart, his gaze fixed on the emerging sun, his face serene despite the ordeal they had endured. Paul met Luke's eyes and offered a small, reassuring smile, a silent acknowledgement of the divine providence that had guided them to this shore. Soon, the islanders, with surprising speed and strength, began to gather dry branches and fallen timber from the sparse vegetation that dotted the landscape. They worked with practiced ease, their movements economical and purposeful. The air began to fill with the scent of damp earth and wood, a comforting aroma after the stench of the storm-tossed ship. In the designated clearing, they piled the wood into a substantial mound, carefully arranging smaller kindling at the base. Then, with a spark struck from flint and steel, a tiny flame flickered to life, nursed carefully by the islanders until it caught hold of the dry tinder. Slowly, tentatively, the fire began to grow, its tendrils of smoke curling upwards into the still morning air. The crackling sound of the burning wood was a symphony of warmth and hope, a stark contrast to the relentless crash of waves that had dominated their lives for so long. As the flames grew stronger, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the survivors, a collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the group. The heat, at first a tentative caress, soon became a powerful embrace, chasing away the deep chill that had permeated their very bones. Julius, finding a spot near the burgeoning bonfire, stretched his hands towards the flames, feeling the warmth penetrate his chilled skin, bringing a welcome flush to his pale cheeks. He watched as his soldiers, their armor stained with salt and their faces etched with exhaustion, gratefully huddled around the fire, their weapons laid aside, their guard momentarily lowered. Even the prisoners, their chains removed during the shipwreck, were allowed to draw near, their gaunt faces illuminated by the flickering light, their eyes reflecting a fragile hope. Paul, ever practical and always seeking to contribute, did not merely stand by. He moved towards the edge of the clearing, where the islanders were still gathering wood, and began to help them. He picked up fallen branches, his movements deliberate and strong, despite the ordeal he had just survived. His hands, though calloused from years of travel and labor, worked with a quiet efficiency, adding to the growing pile of fuel for the life-giving fire. Luke watched him, a familiar sense of admiration swelling in his chest. Paul never sought to be served, he always sought to serve. As Paul bent down to retrieve a particularly gnarled piece of wood from beneath a dense thicket, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through his hand. He recoiled instinctively, his fingers clenching, and looked down to see a small, dark creature, no thicker than his thumb, still clinging to his flesh. It was a viper, its scales a dull, earthy brown, its head triangular and menacing. It had been hidden beneath the wood, disturbed by his touch, and had struck out in defense. A gasp went through the nearby islanders who had witnessed the sudden attack. Their murmurs, previously gentle and welcoming, now turned to exclamations of alarm and fear. They pointed at Paul, their faces contorted with a mixture of dread and a strange, almost superstitious awe. The older islander, who had first approached them, rushed forward, his eyes wide with a chilling certainty. "He is a murderer," the islanders cried out in their native tongue, their words incomprehensible to Paul and his companions, yet their meaning conveyed with terrifying clarity through their gestures and expressions. "Though he escaped the sea, justice does not permit him to live." They believed that the viper's bite was divine retribution, a sign that the gods of the sea, or perhaps some other vengeful deity, had finally caught up with this man, punishing him for some heinous crime. They expected him to swell up, his body to blacken, and to fall dead before their very eyes, a gruesome testament to the inescapable hand of fate. Julius, who had been enjoying the warmth of the fire, heard the sudden commotion and turned sharply, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his gladius. He saw the viper, now dislodged, writhing on the ground, and then his gaze fixed on Paul, who stood remarkably still, his hand outstretched, a small, dark mark already forming on his skin. The centurion's heart pounded with a sudden, unexpected fear, not for himself, but for this unusual prisoner who had so profoundly impressed him. He had seen men die from snake bites in distant campaigns, the agony swift and terrible. Luke, ever the physician, rushed to Paul's side, his mind racing through remedies and antidotes, his hand reaching out to examine the wound. He saw the 2 tiny puncture marks, the telltale sign of a venomous bite. His brow furrowed with concern, his professional instincts kicking in even as a cold dread began to creep into his own heart. The islanders watched with bated breath, their eyes fixed on Paul, waiting for the inevitable signs of the poison taking hold. But Paul, with a calm that bordered on the miraculous, simply looked at the viper still writhing on the ground. Then, with a deliberate, almost casual motion, he shook his hand. The venomous creature, dislodged from his skin, flew through the air and landed directly into the heart of the roaring bonfire, where it was instantly consumed by the hungry flames, turning to ash in a matter of seconds. A stunned silence fell over the clearing. The islanders, who had been murmuring predictions of doom, now stood frozen, their mouths agape, their eyes wide with disbelief. They watched Paul intently, their expressions shifting from fear to utter astonishment. They waited and waited for the swelling, for the pain, for the collapse, for the telltale signs of death that they knew so well. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. The fire crackled merrily, casting its warm glow on the faces of the onlookers, highlighting their shock. Paul remained standing, his posture upright, his breathing steady, his face unclouded by pain or fear. He simply stood there, a testament to an unseen power, his hand, though marked, showing no signs of swelling or discoloration. The venom, it seemed, had had no effect. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the islanders' expressions began to change. The fear in their eyes gave way to a profound wonder, then to a dawning reverence. Their initial belief that he was a murderer, justly punished by the gods, evaporated like the morning mist. Instead, a new, far more astonishing thought began to take root in their minds, whispered from one to another in hushed, awestruck tones. "He is a god," they exclaimed, their voices filled with a new kind of awe, their previous judgment completely overturned. They had seen the sea try to claim him and fail. They had seen the viper strike and fail. This man, they concluded, must be more than human. He must be a divine being, walking among them, protected by powers beyond their comprehension. Julius, the seasoned centurion, watched this transformation with a mixture of bewilderment and a growing sense of conviction. He had seen many things in his years of service, witnessed many strange occurrences, but nothing quite like this. He had seen Paul predict the shipwreck, seen him calm the terrified crew, seen him inspire hope when all seemed lost. Now, he had seen him survive a viper's bite, an event that defied all natural explanation. The centurion, a man of logic and order, found himself grappling with something that transcended his understanding, something that hinted at a deeper, more profound truth. He looked at Paul, truly looked at him, and saw not just a prisoner, but a man touched by an extraordinary grace. Luke, too, felt a profound sense of wonder, his physician's mind struggling to reconcile what he had just witnessed with all known medical knowledge. He had seen the viper, recognized its deadly nature, and fully expected to see its venom take its terrible toll. Yet, Paul stood unharmed, a living testament to a power that defied the natural order. Luke felt a renewed strengthening of his faith, a deep and quiet certainty that he was witnessing something truly miraculous, something that would forever shape his understanding of divine providence. The atmosphere in the clearing had shifted entirely. The initial cautious hospitality of the islanders had blossomed into an open, almost worshipful reverence. They no longer saw a shipwrecked stranger, but a figure of immense power, a harbinger of the divine. They began to approach Paul with a newfound respect, their gestures now humble and deferential. They brought him more wood, offered him their simple food, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and adoration. The bonfire, now roaring brightly, cast its golden light across the scene, illuminating the faces of the survivors and the islanders alike. The warmth it provided was more than just physical, it was a warmth of human kindness, of unexpected hospitality, and of a dawning recognition of the miraculous. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the clean, damp air, creating an aroma of comfort and safety. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last vestiges of the mist, the island of Malta revealed itself in its rugged beauty. The sea, though still churning from the recent storm, seemed to have settled into a calmer rhythm, its waves gently lapping against the shore, a soft counterpoint to the crackling fire. And in the heart of this unexpected refuge, amidst the simple kindness of strangers and the profound mystery of a divine intervention, Paul stood, a beacon of unwavering faith, his presence a testament to the enduring power of hope and the miraculous provision that can be found even in the most desolate of circumstances. The journey had been long and perilous, but on this shore, under the watchful eyes of both men and an unseen power, a new chapter of their extraordinary tale had just begun. The days that followed the shipwreck unfolded with a gentle rhythm, a stark contrast to the tempest that had driven them ashore. The island, which the locals called Malta, revealed itself to be a place of unexpected beauty and profound kindness, a verdant haven emerging from the tumultuous Cobalt Sea. Publius, the island's chief official, a man whose quiet dignity was matched only by his generous spirit, had welcomed Paul and his companions into his home, a sprawling villa built of pale, sun-warmed stone, overlooking a sheltered cove where the azure water lapped softly against the shore. Luke, ever the observant physician, found himself drawn to the quiet suffering that sometimes flickered behind Publius's otherwise composed demeanor. He noticed the way the official's gaze would drift towards a particular window, his brow subtly furrowing, a silent worry etched upon his features. It was not long before Publius, in a moment of shared quiet over a meal of freshly caught fish and sun-ripened figs, confided in them the source of his distress. His father, a venerable elder of the community, lay gravely ill, afflicted by a persistent fever and a debilitating dysentery that had sapped his strength and dimmed the light in his eyes. The local healers, with their poultices and ancient remedies, had done what they could, but the old man's condition seemed only to worsen, leaving Publius with a heavy heart and a growing sense of helplessness. Paul, who had listened with a compassionate attentiveness, felt a familiar stirring within him, a quiet certainty that this was not merely a tale of misfortune but an invitation, a divine opening. He looked at Luke, whose understanding gaze met his, and then back at Publius, a gentle resolve settling upon his face. "Let us go to him," Paul said, his voice soft yet imbued with an unmistakable authority, "and pray for his healing." Publius, though perhaps unfamiliar with such a direct and confident declaration of divine intervention, was a man of open heart and desperate hope. He led them through cool, shadowed corridors, the air growing heavier with the scent of herbs and illness, until they reached a spacious chamber where the elder lay. The room was hushed, save for the old man's shallow, labored breathing. Sunlight, filtered through a narrow window, cast a soft, golden glow upon his pale, drawn face, highlighting the lines of worry and pain etched around his eyes. He was frail, his body thin beneath the woven blankets, his spirit seemingly flickering like a candle in a draught. Paul approached the bedside with an unhurried grace, his movements deliberate and calm, radiating a profound sense of peace that seemed to fill the room. He knelt beside the bed, his hands, which had so recently toiled with ropes and timber, now rested gently upon the old man's forehead, a touch both tender and firm. Luke watched, his physician's eye noting the subtle tremors that still racked the elder's body, the clammy sheen on his skin. Paul's eyes closed, and he began to pray, not with a loud, theatrical pronouncement, but with a quiet, earnest intensity, his words a murmur of faith and supplication that seemed to weave themselves into the very fabric of the air. He spoke of the God who created all things, the God of boundless compassion and limitless power, the God who heals. As Paul prayed, a stillness descended upon the room, a palpable sense of presence. Luke felt a warmth emanating from Paul's hands, a subtle energy that seemed to flow into the ailing man. He saw a flicker, a faint tremor, pass through the elder's eyelids, and then a slow, deep breath, more substantial than any he had taken before. Publius, standing a little distance away, watched with a mixture of awe and trepidation, his hands clasped tightly before him, his gaze fixed on his father's face. Then, as Paul concluded his prayer with a soft amen, the old man stirred. His eyes, which had been dull and unfocused, slowly opened, and for the first time in many days, a spark of recognition, a glint of clarity, returned to them. He looked at Paul, then at Publius, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The fever, which had raged within him, began to recede, its fiery grip loosening, and the debilitating pain that had racked his body seemed to melt away like snow under the morning sun. Within moments, the pallor began to lift from his face, replaced by a faint flush of returning vitality. He coughed, a soft, clearing sound, and then, to the utter astonishment of Publius, he spoke, his voice weak but clear, I feel better." Publius, overwhelmed with a rush of emotion, knelt beside the bed, tears welling in his eyes, clutching his father's hand, which now felt warmer, stronger. The transformation was undeniable, miraculous. Luke, ever the man of science, observed the rapid improvement with a quiet wonder, his mind grappling with the swift, profound change that defied all conventional medical explanation. He knew the body's capacity for healing, but this was something beyond the natural order, a direct intervention, a testament to the power Paul carried. News of the elder Publius's healing spread like wildfire across the small island. The Maltese islanders, a people deeply connected to their land and the sea, were accustomed to the ebb and flow of life and death, to the caprices of nature and the mysteries of their ancient gods. They were also a people who understood suffering and the joy that healing brought. Word traveled from the villa to the sun-drenched fields, to the fishing villages nestled in the coves, carried on the gentle sea breeze. Soon, a steady stream of people began to arrive at Publius's home, their faces etched with hope and desperation. They came with their ailments, the old woman with the persistent cough that rattled her bones, the young child whose eyes were clouded with fever, the fisherman whose leg had been twisted in a fall, leaving him in constant pain. Each one approached Paul with a mixture of reverence and tentative hope, their stories whispered in their melodic, unfamiliar tongue, translated by Publius or one of his household. Paul, with unwavering patience and compassion, laid his hands upon each of them, praying with the same quiet intensity he had shown for Publius's father. And with each prayer, healing flowed. The cough subsided, the fever broke, the pain receded, the twisted limbs found ease. Luke, standing by Paul's side, offered what practical assistance he could, but mostly he observed, his heart filled with a profound sense of awe. He saw not just physical healing, but a transformation of spirit, a lifting of burdens, a dawning of hope in eyes that had known only resignation. The islanders, who had initially viewed Paul and his companions with a cautious curiosity, and then with a fleeting suspicion after the snake incident, now looked upon him with a deep, abiding reverence. They saw not a prisoner, not merely a shipwrecked stranger, but a man touched by the divine, a conduit for a power far greater than any they had ever encountered. The villa, once a refuge for a handful of weary travelers, became a place of pilgrimage, a sanctuary of healing. The air, once heavy with the scent of illness, now hummed with the quiet joy of recovery, the soft murmurs of gratitude, and the hushed whispers of wonder. Paul, despite the constant demands on his energy, seemed to draw strength from the very act of giving, his faith deepening with each miracle, his resolve strengthened by the tangible evidence of God's benevolent hand at work. As the weeks turned into months, the season began to shift, the harsh winds of winter giving way to the milder breezes of spring. The time for their departure was drawing near, the sea once again navigable, the opportunity to continue their journey to Rome presenting itself. The islanders, who had so generously offered shelter and warmth, now sought to express their boundless gratitude. They gathered at Publius's villa, a vibrant assembly of faces weathered by sun and sea, their hearts overflowing. They brought gifts, not out of obligation, but from a genuine wellspring of appreciation. From their simple homes, they brought what they had: baskets woven from dried palm leaves, filled with sun-dried figs and dates, sweet honey from their wild bees, and loaves of freshly baked bread still warm from the earthen ovens. Fishermen brought their finest catches, gleaming silver fish wrapped in damp leaves, and sturdy nets mended with care. Farmers offered sacks of plump olives, fragrant herbs, and the rich, red earth's bounty. Women brought intricately embroidered cloths and small, hand-carved wooden figures, tokens of their artistry and affection. Publius, who had become a steadfast friend and benefactor, oversaw the preparations for their continued voyage with meticulous care. He knew the perils of the sea, and he understood the needs of travelers. He arranged for their passage on another ship, a sturdy Alexandrian vessel bound for Italy, which had wintered in a nearby harbor. But his generosity did not stop there. He ensured that they were not only well provisioned for the journey, but abundantly so. He had his servants load the ship with barrels of fresh water, casks of fine Maltese wine, and ample stores of grain and dried meat. He provided them with warm cloaks, knowing the chill of the open sea, and sturdy sandals for the long roads ahead. He even presented Paul with a finely crafted staff, its wood smooth and polished, a practical aid for walking and a symbolic gesture of respect for a man who had brought so much light to their island. As the day of their departure dawned, the air was crisp and clear, the sea a calm, inviting expanse of deep blue. The entire community gathered at the harbor, a throng of grateful faces, their voices a soft hum of farewells and blessings. Children, who had once eyed the strangers with shy curiosity, now clung to Paul's robes, their small hands offering him wildflowers. The old woman whose cough he had healed pressed a small, smooth sea stone into his palm, her eyes brimming with unshed tears of gratitude. Paul stood on the deck of the Alexandrian ship, looking out at the faces of the Maltese people, his heart full. He saw Publius, standing tall and dignified, a man transformed by faith and generosity. He saw the elders, their faces now serene, their eyes bright with health. He saw the islanders, their initial fear and superstition replaced by an abiding reverence and a profound sense of connection. Luke stood beside him, his gaze sweeping over the scene, meticulously committing every detail to memory, knowing that these moments, these acts of kindness and miraculous healing, were threads in a larger tapestry of divine purpose. The anchor was weighed, the sails unfurled, catching the gentle morning breeze. The ship began to glide slowly away from the shore, the faces of the islanders growing smaller, their farewells echoing across the water. Paul raised his hand in a final gesture of blessing and gratitude, a silent promise that the memory of their kindness, their open hearts, and the miracles witnessed on their shores would forever be etched in his spirit. The journey had been long and perilous, marked by storm and shipwreck, by fear and uncertainty. But in the heart of this unexpected refuge, amidst the profound kindness of strangers and the undeniable mystery of divine intervention, Paul had stood, a beacon of unwavering faith. Now, as the shores of Melita receded into the distance, a new chapter of their extraordinary tale was about to unfold, carrying with it the echoes of healing, the warmth of grateful hearts, and the enduring testament to the miraculous provision that can be found even in the most desolate of circumstances, guiding them onward towards their destined purpose. As the shores of Melita receded into the distance, a new chapter of their extraordinary tale was about to unfold, carrying with it the echoes of healing, the warmth of grateful hearts, and the enduring testament to the miraculous provision that can be found even in the most desolate of circumstances, guiding them onward towards their destined purpose. The winter months on Melita had passed with a gentle, unhurried rhythm, a stark contrast to the tempest that had delivered them to its shores. 3 moons had waxed and waned since the shipwreck, each bringing with it a deeper sense of peace and restoration for the weary travelers. The islanders, whose initial awe at Paul's immunity to the viper's bite had blossomed into profound respect and affection, had showered the shipwrecked crew and passengers with an abundance of hospitality. Publius, the chief official, had become a steadfast friend, his home a sanctuary, his generosity boundless. Through Paul's hands, many on the island had found healing, not only from physical ailments but from the unspoken anxieties that often plagued isolated communities. The stories of these healings, whispered from village to village, had woven a tapestry of wonder around Paul, transforming him from a mere prisoner into a revered figure, a man touched by the divine. Julius, the centurion, had watched Paul closely during these months, his initial respect deepening into an almost filial regard. He had seen Paul, not as a zealot, but as a man of profound wisdom and unwavering conviction, whose calm presence had been the anchor of their survival. He had witnessed Paul's tireless efforts to assist the islanders, to share his knowledge, and to offer comfort, never once demanding special treatment despite the veneration he received. Julius often found himself reflecting on the tumultuous voyage, remembering Paul's quiet warnings, his prophetic vision of the storm, and his unwavering assurance of their survival. The centurion, a man accustomed to the rigid hierarchies of the Roman military, found himself bowing to a different kind of authority, one born not of rank or power, but of an inner light that shone brightest in the darkest hours. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that his duty now extended beyond merely delivering a prisoner. It was to protect a man of extraordinary grace. Luke, ever the observant chronicler, spent his days recording the events, his quill scratching softly on papyrus, capturing the nuances of their stay. He interviewed the grateful islanders, noting their simple faith and their genuine kindness. He watched Paul, marveling at his resilience and his boundless empathy. The physician in him admired Paul's practical skills in tending to the sick, while the disciple in him revered Paul's spiritual strength. Luke understood that these 3 months were not merely a delay but a divine interlude, a period of healing and preparation, not just for Paul, but for all who had endured the storm. He felt the quiet stirrings of hope within himself, a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that every trial they faced was but another chapter in a larger, more magnificent story. As winter's grip began to loosen and the Mediterranean sun gained strength, the time came for their departure. Another ship, an Alexandrian grain vessel named the Castor and Pollux, which had also wintered on Malta, was preparing to set sail for Rome. Its twin figureheads, depicting the divine brothers, seemed to offer a silent promise of safe passage. The islanders, their hearts heavy with farewell, gathered at the harbor, their faces a mixture of sadness and gratitude. They had not only provided for the shipwrecked travelers but had also received a profound gift in return. As a testament to their affection and as a practical provision for the long journey ahead, they loaded the ship with generous supplies to fresh water, dried fruits, cured meats, and warm cloaks, ensuring that Paul and his companions would want for nothing. The air that morning was crisp and clean, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the faint, sweet scent of blooming wildflowers from the island's interior. The sky, a vast expanse of brilliant azure, stretched endlessly above them, a stark contrast to the bruised, angry heavens that had raged just months before. A gentle breeze, a benevolent zephyr, stirred the sails, filling them with a quiet promise of favorable winds. Paul stood on the deck, his gaze sweeping across the familiar faces of the islanders, a soft smile gracing his lips. He raised a hand in a gesture of farewell, his heart overflowing with gratitude for their boundless kindness. He felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet assurance that even in the midst of unexpected detours, God's hand was always guiding, always providing. The journey ahead was still long, and Rome, with its imperial might and its complex challenges, awaited, but Paul felt refreshed, his spirit renewed, his resolve unshaken. Julius stood beside him, his posture erect, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had personally overseen the loading of the provisions, ensuring that Paul and his companions were afforded every comfort possible. He had even secured a more spacious cabin for Paul, a small but significant gesture of his esteem. The centurion felt a lightness in his own spirit, a sense of anticipation that had been absent for many months. This journey, he knew, was not merely a return to duty, but a continuation of a remarkable odyssey, one that had irrevocably altered his understanding of faith, leadership, and the human spirit. Luke, positioned near the stern, watched the receding coastline of Melita, his hand resting on the wooden rail. He felt a pang of nostalgia for the peaceful interlude, yet also a surge of excitement for the path ahead. He knew that the story he was meticulously crafting was far from over, and each new port, each new encounter, would add another rich layer to the narrative of Paul's unwavering journey. The gentle lapping of the waves against the hull, the rhythmic creak of the ship's timbers, and the distant cries of seabirds all combined to create a symphony of departure, a hopeful overture to the next leg of their voyage. The Castor and Pollux sailed northward, its sails billowing gracefully, propelled by the steady, favorable wind. The sea, which had once been their adversary, now cradled them gently, its vast expanse a shimmering canvas of blues and greens. The days unfolded with a tranquil predictability, a welcome balm after the recent chaos. Paul spent his time in quiet contemplation, in conversation with Luke, and occasionally sharing stories and wisdom with the crew and the other passengers, many of whom had heard tales of his miraculous deeds on Melita. Their first stop was Syracuse, the ancient and magnificent city on the eastern coast of Sicily. As the ship approached the harbor, the passengers gathered at the railings, their eyes wide with wonder. The city rose majestically from the sea, its grand temples and imposing fortifications gleaming under the Mediterranean sun. The air was filled with the sounds of a bustling port, to the shouts of merchants, the creak of cranes, the rhythmic splash of oars, and the distant murmur of a vibrant city. The scent of salt and fish mingled with the aroma of exotic spices and blooming oleander, carried on the gentle breeze. For 3 days, the Castor and Pollux remained in Syracuse, allowing the crew to resupply and the passengers to stretch their legs and explore. Paul, accompanied by Luke and under the watchful eye of Julius, walked the ancient streets, marveling at the city's rich history and its impressive architecture. He observed the diverse crowds, the Romans, Greeks, and various other peoples, all moving with a sense of purpose and belonging. He saw the temples dedicated to pagan gods, the bustling marketplaces, and the quiet corners where philosophers might have once debated. For Paul, each city was not merely a geographical location but a tapestry of souls, a field ripe for the seeds of the gospel. He engaged in quiet conversations, his words gentle but profound, leaving behind a subtle resonance in the hearts of those who listened. Luke, ever the meticulous observer, noted the details of the city, its customs, and its people, adding to his growing compendium of knowledge. He found himself drawn to the city's library, imagining the vast scrolls it contained, the accumulated wisdom of centuries. He felt a deep connection to the intellectual currents of the ancient world, even as his faith anchored him to a truth that transcended human philosophy. Julius, meanwhile, attended to his official duties, meeting with local Roman officials, ensuring the security of his prisoners, and gathering intelligence. He appreciated the efficiency and order of Roman administration, a familiar comfort in the often unpredictable world. Yet, even amidst his duties, his thoughts often drifted to Paul, to the quiet strength that emanated from the man, a strength that seemed to transcend even the might of Rome itself. He knew that his charge was no ordinary prisoner, and the journey ahead, though seemingly mundane, was anything but. After their brief but refreshing stay, the Castor and Pollux hoisted anchor once more, setting a course northward along the Italian coast. The journey from Syracuse was swift, aided by favorable winds that filled their sails and propelled them steadily across the azure waters. The ship, now fully provisioned and with a rested crew, seemed to glide effortlessly, leaving a frothy white trail in its wake. The sun, a warm, benevolent presence, cast a golden sheen upon the waves, transforming the vast expanse of the sea into a shimmering, ever-changing jewel. Their next destination was Rhegium, a city nestled on the toe of Italy's boot, overlooking the narrow Strait of Messina, where the currents were famously treacherous. As they approached the strait, the wind, which had been so cooperative, shifted abruptly, turning contrary. The ship's progress slowed, the sails flapping impotently, the vessel now at the mercy of the currents. The captain, a seasoned mariner, knew better than to fight the unpredictable whims of this particular stretch of water. He ordered the anchors dropped, and the ship settled into a temporary, uneasy stillness, waiting for a change in the wind. The delay, though frustrating, was brief. On the following day, a gentle south wind, known as a notus, began to stir. It was a favorable wind, a welcome sign for sailors navigating these challenging waters. The captain, seizing the opportunity, ordered the anchors raised, and the Castor and Pollux resumed its journey, now propelled by a steady, guiding force. As they sailed through the Strait of Messina, Paul stood at the bow, his gaze fixed on the distant shores. To his left lay the rugged coast of Sicily, dominated by the imposing, smoking peak of Mount Etna, a silent sentinel against the sky. To his right, the verdant hills of mainland Italy rose majestically, dotted with small towns and ancient ruins. The strait itself was a spectacle of churning currents and swirling eddies, a testament to the raw power of the sea. Yet, under the benevolent notice, the ship passed through without incident, a calm passage through a notoriously dangerous stretch. Luke joined Paul at the railing, his eyes scanning the horizon, absorbing every detail. He felt a profound sense of awe, not only at the natural grandeur of the landscape but at the steady, unwavering progress of their journey. Each mile covered, each port reached, was a small victory, a testament to resilience and divine guidance. He thought of the storm, the despair, the miraculous survival, and now this calm, purposeful sailing. It was as if the very elements, having tested them to their limits, were now conspiring to carry them gently towards their ultimate destination. Julius, observing Paul from a short distance, felt a quiet satisfaction. The journey was progressing smoothly, without further incident. The centurion had learned much from Paul, not just about enduring hardship, but about the profound peace that could be found in unwavering faith. He had seen Paul face death with equanimity, heal the sick with compassion, and inspire hope in the hearts of strangers. Now, as they drew closer to Rome, Julius felt a sense of anticipation, not just for the completion of his duty, but for what new revelations might unfold in the imperial city, with Paul as his unexpected guide. The ship continued its northward trajectory, the shores of Italy unfolding before them like a grand tapestry. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine forests and distant mountain snow. The days shortened, and the nights grew longer, but the sky remained clear, studded with 1,000,000 glittering stars, each a tiny beacon in the vast cosmic ocean. Paul often found himself gazing at those stars, his thoughts drifting to the countless souls he had encountered, the lives touched by the message he carried. He knew that Rome, the heart of the empire, would present new challenges, new audiences, and new opportunities. He felt a deep sense of purpose, a quiet determination that transcended weariness or apprehension. The journey, with all its trials and triumphs, was not merely a physical passage but a spiritual pilgrimage, a testament to the enduring power of faith and the unwavering promise of a divine plan. As the Castor and Pollux sailed onward, leaving Rhegium behind, the rhythmic creak of the ship, the gentle lapping of the waves, and the soft whisper of the wind in the sails became a lullaby, a comforting assurance of progress. Each passing mile brought them closer to Rome, closer to the culmination of Paul's long-held dream, and closer to the unfolding of a story that would echo through the ages. The vast, tranquil sea stretched out before them, an open road to destiny, carrying them steadily towards the dawn of a new horizon, filled with the quiet promise of what was yet to come. The vast, tranquil sea stretched out before them, an open road to destiny, carrying them steadily towards the dawn of a new horizon, filled with the quiet promise of what was yet to come. Days turned into weeks as the new ship, a sturdy Alexandrian grain vessel, cut a steady path across the azure waters of the Mediterranean. The memory of the tempest, the terrifying Euroclydon, and the shipwreck on Malta began to recede, replaced by the rhythmic creak of the timbers and the gentle sway of the deck. Julius, the centurion, often found himself observing Paul, a quiet respect having settled between them, forged in the crucible of shared peril. He had seen Paul's unwavering calm, his uncanny foresight, and the profound impact of his words, not just on the crew and passengers, but on the very fabric of their desperate situation. The centurion, a man accustomed to leading legions and enforcing Roman law, recognized a different kind of authority in the prisoner he guarded, an authority that transcended earthly power. Luke, ever the meticulous observer, spent his days chronicling the journey, his stylus scratching softly on papyrus. He recorded the changing hues of the sea, the distant outlines of land, and the conversations that unfolded around him. He noted Julius's growing deference towards Paul, a subtle shift in the centurion's demeanor that spoke volumes. He also documented the quiet moments of reflection, the ways in which Paul, despite his chains and his status as a prisoner, continued to offer comfort, counsel, and hope to those around him. The physician understood that this journey was not merely a passage across water, but a profound testament to enduring faith, a living narrative of divine providence unfolding before his very eyes. Their voyage took them past Sicily, a verdant jewel rising from the sea, its slopes dotted with olive groves and ancient temples. They sailed through the narrow Strait of Messina, where the current swirled and danced, and the legendary Scylla and Charybdis were but distant whispers of myth. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, a profound sense of peace settled over the ship. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of distant land, a promise of arrival. Finally, after a journey that had spanned months and encompassed unimaginable trials, the ship neared the shores of Italia. The first sight of the Italian coastline, a hazy outline on the horizon brought a collective sigh of relief from all aboard. The land rose in gentle hills, covered in a patchwork of vineyards and forests, a stark contrast to the wild, untamed shores of Malta. As they sailed closer, the landscape sharpened, revealing ancient villas perched on cliffs and the promise of civilization. Their first stop was the bustling port of Puteoli, a vibrant hub of trade and commerce. The harbor teemed with ships from every corner of the Roman Empire, their masts forming a dense forest against the sky. The air was thick with the cries of merchants, the clatter of goods being unloaded, and the salty tang of the sea mingled with the exotic aromas of spices and foreign wares. Here, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Paul, Luke, and Julius stepped onto solid ground that was not a desolate island or a foreign shore. It was in Puteoli that the first glimmers of the communal welcome began to unfold. Word of Paul's arrival, carried by earlier travelers or perhaps by the invisible threads of fellowship that connected believers across vast distances, had preceded them. As Paul disembarked, still under the watchful eye of Julius's soldiers, a small group of believers from the local community approached. Their faces were etched with a mixture of awe and joy, their eyes shining with recognition. They offered warm greetings, not as strangers, but as family, their voices soft with reverence. "Brother Paul," one man whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "we have waited for you." They invited Paul and his companions to stay with them for 7 days, an unexpected reprieve from the rigors of travel and the confines of the ship. Julius, witnessing the genuine affection and respect shown to his prisoner, and perhaps sensing the benign nature of these gatherings, granted the request. He observed how Paul, even in his chains, moved among these people with an air of quiet authority and deep compassion. He saw how Paul listened intently to their stories, offered words of encouragement, and shared meals with them, not as a guest, but as a beloved elder. The centurion, a man of duty and order, found himself observing a different kind of order, a spiritual kinship that transcended the boundaries of language and culture. Luke, during these days, found solace and renewed strength in the fellowship. He watched Paul, his face illuminated by the flickering lamplight during their evening gatherings, as he spoke of his journey, of the storm, and of God's unfailing provision. He saw the tears in the eyes of the listeners, the nods of understanding, and the quiet joy that filled the room. These moments, steeped in shared faith and communal warmth, were a balm to the soul after the harshness of the sea. After 7 blessed days, the journey resumed, this time by land. The road to Rome stretched before them, an ancient artery of the empire, paved with stones worn smooth by countless footsteps and chariot wheels. The landscape changed with each passing mile, from coastal plains to rolling hills, dotted with cypress trees and ancient ruins. The air was filled with the sounds of travel, the creak of wagons, the distant shouts of farmers, and the rhythmic crunch of their sandals on the dusty road. As they drew closer to the imperial city, the anticipation grew palpable. Paul, despite the weariness of the journey and the weight of his chains, felt a surge of exhilaration. Rome, the heart of the known world, the very center of power and influence, was finally within his reach. It was a city he had longed to visit, not for its grandeur or its monuments, but for the community of believers who resided there, a community he yearned to strengthen and encourage. The first indication of Rome's proximity came at the Forum of Appius, a bustling market town some 40 miles from the capital. Here, another group of believers, having heard of Paul's approach, had traveled to meet him. Their faces were alight with eagerness, their hands outstretched in welcome. They brought provisions, offered words of comfort, and walked alongside Paul, sharing the burden of the final miles. The sight of these faithful souls, who had journeyed to greet him, filled Paul with profound gratitude and renewed courage. He knew then, with an unshakable certainty, that he was not alone, that his mission was not his own, but part of a larger, divine tapestry. A little further on, at a place called the Three Taverns, yet another group of believers awaited them. These were men and women who had walked even further, their determination a testament to their love and respect for the apostle. Their presence was a powerful affirmation, a visible manifestation of the spiritual family that spanned the empire. As Paul saw them, his heart swelled, and he offered a silent prayer of thanks, his spirit lifted by this outpouring of communal love. It was a moment of deep, quiet triumph, a testament to the enduring power of faith and fellowship. Julius, observing these successive welcomes, felt a growing sense of wonder. He had escorted countless prisoners to Rome, but never had he witnessed such a reception. These people, from different walks of life, united by an invisible bond, treated Paul not as a criminal, but as a revered leader, a spiritual father. The centurion, whose life revolved around the strict hierarchies of the Roman army, began to grasp the profound, egalitarian nature of this new faith, where status and wealth mattered little compared to shared belief. Finally, the majestic city of Rome emerged on the horizon, its sprawling expanse a testament to centuries of power and ambition. The distant murmur of its teeming streets, the glint of sunlight on its marble temples, and the sheer scale of its architecture filled the air with an undeniable presence. As they drew closer, the towering aqueducts, ancient arteries carrying life-giving water, stretched across the landscape like colossal stone giants, leading the way to the heart of the empire. They entered Rome through one of its grand gates, the clatter of their sandals echoing on the ancient cobblestones. The city enveloped them in a symphony of sounds, the rumble of chariots, the shouts of vendors, the babble of countless languages, and the distant roar of the crowds from the Colosseum. The air was a complex tapestry of smells, incense from temples, roasting meats from street stalls, the earthy scent of the Tiber, and the pervasive aroma of humanity. Paul, still a prisoner, was led through the bustling streets, past magnificent forums, towering monuments, and grand basilicas. His eyes, though weary from travel, took in the vibrant tapestry of Roman life, a world he had long desired to reach. He was brought to the Praetorian Guard barracks, a formidable fortress within the city, where he was to be held under house arrest, chained to a soldier. Yet, even in this confinement, the promise of the journey found its gentle culmination. Paul was granted the unusual privilege of living in rented quarters, rather than a common prison cell, though always under guard. It was here, in his own rented house, that the final, peaceful resolution of his long and arduous journey unfolded. Luke, ever by his side, helped him settle in, arranging his scrolls and writing materials. The small house, though modest, offered a sanctuary, a place where Paul could receive visitors, write letters, and continue his ministry, even while awaiting trial. The clinking of the chain that bound him to a Roman soldier became a constant, rhythmic counterpoint to the quiet hum of his daily life, a reminder of his circumstances, yet not a hindrance to his spirit. Julius, having delivered his prisoner safely to the authorities, performed his final duties with a quiet dignity. He had witnessed Paul's journey from a different perspective, seeing not just a prisoner, but a man of extraordinary faith and resilience. As he prepared to leave Paul in the custody of the Praetorian Guard, a silent understanding passed between them, a shared memory of storms weathered and lives saved. The centurion, a man of the world, had encountered something beyond his understanding, something that had subtly reshaped his own perception of power and truth. In the quiet evenings that followed, as the Roman twilight softened the edges of the city and the sounds of the day began to recede, Paul would often sit by a window, looking out at the rooftops of Rome. The city, vast and powerful, lay before him, a testament to human ambition. Yet, within its walls, a different kind of power was at work, a quiet, persistent force of faith and love. Believers from the Roman community, emboldened by his presence, came to visit him regularly. They brought news, shared meals, and listened intently as Paul taught them, his voice gentle but firm, filled with the wisdom gleaned from his trials. The small rented house became a beacon of hope, a place where the story of the shipwreck, of divine protection, and of unwavering faith was recounted again and again, strengthening the hearts of all who heard it. Luke, sitting nearby, would often watch Paul, his face illuminated by the soft glow of an oil lamp. He saw not a prisoner, but a man at peace, his mission fulfilled, his spirit unbroken. The journey to Rome, fraught with peril and uncertainty, had indeed reached its gentle end. The storms had passed, the dangers had receded, and the unwavering hand of Providence had guided them through it all. The sounds of the city, once a cacophony, now seemed to blend into a soft, distant hum. The gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of a nearby olive tree, carrying the faint scent of night-blooming jasmine. The stars, ancient and serene, began to appear in the velvet sky, their silent watch a reminder of the vast, unchanging cosmos. Paul, surrounded by the quiet hum of the night and the steadfast presence of his companions, felt a profound sense of gratitude. His long-held dream had been realized, not in triumph and fanfare, but in the quiet strength of community, in the enduring power of faith, and in the gentle unfolding of a divine plan that had brought him safely to the heart of the empire. The world outside his window, vast and complex, settled into a peaceful slumber, mirroring the quiet contentment that now filled his soul. The soft glow of an oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the simple room, illuminating the worn pages of a scroll Paul held gently in his hands, its ancient script a familiar comfort in the quiet Roman night. Outside, the city's distant murmur, a symphony of human endeavor and ancient stone, had softened to a mere whisper, a rhythmic backdrop to the profound stillness that settled within the small dwelling. Luke, ever watchful and attentive, sat across from him, meticulously grinding herbs in a small stone mortar, the subtle aroma of medicinal plants filling the air with an earthy, comforting scent. He paused his work, his gaze thoughtful as he observed Paul, whose eyes, though fixed on the scroll, seemed to look far beyond the parchment, into the depths of memory and meaning. The words of the prophet Isaiah, Paul finally murmured, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate with the wisdom of ages. They speak of a path made straight in the wilderness, a highway for our God, a promise of comfort for his people. He looked up, his gaze meeting Luke's, a gentle smile gracing his lips, and indeed, Luke, we have seen that path, have we not, carved through the very heart of the storm, across the unforgiving sea, and even amidst the kindness of strangers on a distant shore. Luke nodded slowly, his hands momentarily still, the rhythmic grinding forgotten as he considered Paul's words, his own mind replaying the tumultuous journey, the desperate days adrift, and the miraculous deliverance upon the shores of Malta. He remembered the fierce winds that had howled like banshees, tearing at the sails, the relentless waves that had crashed over the deck, threatening to swallow their vessel whole, and the chilling certainty of impending doom that had gripped the hearts of all aboard. Yet, through it all, Paul had stood firm, a beacon of unwavering faith, his words of assurance a lifeline in the swirling chaos, a testament to a divine presence that had calmed the fears of hardened sailors and terrified prisoners alike. The islanders, Luke mused aloud, his voice soft, recalling the warmth of the fires and the genuine hospitality that had greeted them on that unexpected shore. Their kindness was a balm to our weary souls, a stark contrast to the ferocity of the sea. He remembered the simple, sturdy hands that had helped them ashore, the generous sharing of food and shelter, and the wide-eyed wonder with which they had observed Paul, especially after the incident with the viper, their initial fear transforming into a reverent awe. The memory of the bonfire, its flames leaping high against the dark sky, casting long, dancing shadows on the faces of the shipwrecked and their rescuers, remained vivid in his mind, a symbol of warmth and welcome amidst the cold uncertainty of their predicament. Paul's gaze drifted towards the small, unadorned window, where the Roman night, though distant, held a certain allure, a promise of new beginnings and uncharted territories for the message he carried. He thought of Publius, the chief official of Malta, whose immediate and generous hospitality had been a true blessing, providing a safe haven for 3 days, a crucial period of recovery and respite for the 276 souls who had miraculously survived the tempest. He recalled the gentle touch of Publius's hand as he led them to his home, the quiet dignity of his demeanor, and the genuine concern in his eyes as he assessed their needs, a true embodiment of human kindness in a world often fraught with indifference. Publius's father, Paul continued, his voice laced with a quiet tenderness, he lay ill with fever and dysentery, a grave affliction that had sapped his strength and brought him to the brink. He remembered the hushed atmosphere of the sick room, the worried faces of the family, and the palpable sense of despair that had permeated the air, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. Paul had entered with a quiet confidence, not born of his own power, but of the divine strength that flowed through him, a channel for healing and hope. He had knelt beside the ailing man, his hand resting gently on the fevered brow, and offered a prayer, a simple yet profound plea to the God who held all life in his hands. A profound peace had settled over the room as Paul prayed, a palpable presence that seemed to soothe the old man's pain and calm the anxieties of his family. And then, slowly, miraculously, the fever had begun to recede, the tremors had subsided, and a faint color had returned to Publius's father's pale cheeks, a visible sign of the healing power that had touched him. The relief that had washed over the family was immense, a wave of gratitude that manifested in their tears and their heartfelt expressions of thanks, their initial skepticism giving way to a profound belief in the extraordinary power at work. News of this miraculous healing had spread like wildfire across the small island, carried on the wind from village to village, igniting hope in the hearts of those who suffered. Soon, the sick and the afflicted from all corners of Malta began to arrive at Publius's home, their faces etched with pain and desperation, their eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. Paul, with Luke by his side, had welcomed each one, offering comfort, prayer, and healing, his hands a conduit for the divine grace that flowed freely, touching bodies and souls alike. He had laid his hands on the lame, and they had walked. He had prayed for the blind, and their sight had been restored. He had spoken words of comfort to the despondent, and their spirits had been lifted. The days that followed had been a blur of compassionate service, a testament to the boundless love and power of God, transforming the island into a sanctuary of healing and hope. The Maltese people, initially viewing Paul and his companions as mere shipwrecked foreigners, now regarded them with a deep reverence, their hearts open to the message of love and salvation that Paul so passionately proclaimed. They brought gifts of food, clothing, and supplies, their generosity overflowing, a tangible expression of their gratitude and newfound faith. The entire island had been touched by the presence of these unexpected visitors, their lives forever altered by the miraculous events that had unfolded in their midst. For 3 months, Luke recalled, his voice tinged with a nostalgic warmth, we were guests on that blessed island, cared for with such profound generosity, our every need anticipated and met. He remembered the quiet beauty of the Maltese landscape, the sun-drenched hills, the azure waters of the Mediterranean, and the simple, honest lives of the islanders, whose hearts had been so readily opened to them. It had been a period of unexpected grace, a pause in their arduous journey, a time for healing and reflection before the final leg of their voyage to Rome. As the winter months gave way to the gentle warmth of spring, a new ship, an Alexandrian vessel named the Castor and Pollux, flying the twin figures of the mythological gods at its prow, finally arrived in the harbor, ready to sail for Italy. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with both anticipation for the journey ahead and a genuine sadness at leaving the kind-hearted people who had become their friends and benefactors. The islanders, in a final act of profound generosity, had loaded the ship with all the provisions they could possibly need for the long voyage, ensuring their comfort and sustenance, their farewells filled with heartfelt blessings and promises of remembrance. The departure had been a poignant affair, with many of the islanders gathered at the shore, waving their goodbyes, their faces a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Paul, standing on the deck of the Castor and Pollux, had looked back at the receding coastline of Malta, his heart filled with a deep sense of peace and thankfulness for the divine provision that had transformed a devastating shipwreck into a season of miraculous blessings. He knew that the seeds of faith had been sown on that small island, and he prayed that they would take root and flourish long after their departure. The voyage from Malta to Syracuse, the ancient and magnificent city on the eastern coast of Sicily, was relatively smooth, a stark contrast to the tempestuous journey that had preceded it. They spent 3 days in Syracuse, allowing the ship to take on fresh supplies and for the crew to rest, giving Paul and Luke a brief opportunity to observe the grandeur of the Greek city, its impressive temples and bustling markets, a testament to its rich history and strategic importance. The air was filled with the scent of spices and the murmur of many languages, a vibrant tapestry of Mediterranean life. From Syracuse, the ship had sailed northward, hugging the Italian coastline, passing by the majestic volcanic peak of Mount Etna, its distant summit often shrouded in a plume of smoke, a silent sentinel watching over the sea. They eventually reached Rhegium, on the toe of Italy, where they waited for a favorable southerly wind to carry them through the narrow Strait of Messina. The sight of the Italian mainland, after so many months at sea and on the island, had filled Paul with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that each mile brought him closer to his ultimate destination, Rome. The southerly wind, a gentle breath of Providence, finally arrived, filling the sails and propelling the Castor and Pollux swiftly through the strait, past the legendary rocks of Scylla and Charybdis, their ancient perils now mere whispers in the wind. The journey continued northward, along the picturesque coast of Campania, the landscape gradually transforming from rugged mountains to fertile plains, dotted with vineyards and olive groves, a vision of classical beauty. Each day brought new sights, new sounds, and a growing sense of anticipation as they drew nearer to the heart of the Roman Empire. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the ship sailed into the bustling harbor of Puteoli, a major port on the Bay of Naples, renowned for its commercial activity and its strategic location. The sight of the crowded docks, teeming with ships from every corner of the Roman world, the cacophony of voices, and the vibrant energy of the city, was a stark reminder of the vastness and complexity of the empire they had finally reached. Here, they disembarked, their feet once again touching solid ground, the final leg of their journey by land now awaiting them. In Puteoli, they were met by a small community of believers, their faces alight with joy and relief at the safe arrival of Paul and his companions. These devoted followers, having heard of Paul's impending arrival, had traveled from Rome to welcome him, their presence a heartwarming testament to the widespread reach of the gospel. Their embrace was warm and genuine, their hospitality immediate, offering Paul and his fellow travelers a much-needed respite for 7 days, a time to rest, to share stories, and to strengthen their bonds of fellowship before embarking on the final stretch to Rome. During their week in Puteoli, Paul had the opportunity to preach and teach, sharing the incredible story of their shipwreck and the divine provision on Malta, inspiring and encouraging the local believers. The fellowship was rich and invigorating, a foretaste of the spiritual community that awaited him in Rome. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for these faithful souls, whose unwavering commitment to the message of Christ provided a powerful network of support throughout the empire. The journey from Puteoli to Rome was undertaken by land, along the famed Appian Way, one of the oldest and most important Roman roads, a marvel of ancient engineering. The road stretched for miles, paved with large, flat stones, flanked by ancient tombs and majestic aqueducts, a silent testament to the enduring power and architectural prowess of the Roman Empire. As they walked, the landscape unfolded before them, a panorama of rolling hills, fertile fields, and distant mountains, each step bringing them closer to the eternal city. At a place called the Forum of Appius, a bustling marketplace and relay station about 43 miles from Rome, they were met by another group of Roman believers who had traveled even further to greet Paul. Their eager faces, their outstretched hands, and their heartfelt expressions of welcome filled Paul's heart with immense encouragement. He felt a surge of renewed strength and purpose, deeply moved by the unwavering devotion of these followers, who were willing to travel such distances simply to offer their support and fellowship. A little further on, at a place called Three Taverns, another group of believers awaited them, their numbers growing, their enthusiasm palpable. The sight of so many faithful faces, gathered along the ancient road, offering comfort and companionship, was a profound affirmation of the divine plan that had guided Paul through every trial and tribulation. He realized that even in his imprisonment, his mission was flourishing, his message resonating with hearts across the vast empire. As they finally approached the gates of Rome, the city's magnificent skyline began to emerge on the horizon, a breathtaking sight of towering structures, grand temples, and bustling markets, a testament to its unparalleled power and influence. The sheer scale and grandeur of the capital city were awe-inspiring, a vibrant hub of culture, commerce, and political might. Paul, the prisoner, was finally arriving at the heart of the empire, not in chains of despair, but as a messenger of hope, his spirit unbowed, his faith unwavering. Upon their arrival in Rome, Paul was not immediately cast into a dark, dank prison cell, as might have been expected for a prisoner awaiting trial before Caesar. Instead, through the compassionate intervention of the centurion Julius, who had witnessed Paul's character and leadership throughout the perilous voyage, Paul was granted a remarkable degree of freedom. He was permitted to live in his own rented house, albeit under the constant guard of a Roman soldier, a chain connecting them as a symbol of his restricted status. This unexpected leniency was a testament to the respect Paul had earned and the divine favor that continued to surround him. The small rented house, though modest, offered a measure of comfort and privacy, a sanctuary in the midst of the bustling city. It became his new headquarters, a place where he could receive visitors, write letters, and continue to preach the gospel, even while awaiting his trial. Luke, ever the loyal companion and meticulous chronicler, remained by his side, assisting him in his ministry, recording his words, and tending to his needs. Within 3 days of his arrival, Paul, ever eager to share the message of Christ, summoned the leading men of the local Jewish community. He explained to them the circumstances of his arrest in Jerusalem, the false accusations leveled against him, and his subsequent appeal to Caesar, emphasizing that he had done nothing against the customs or traditions of their people. He spoke of his unwavering belief in the hope of Israel, the resurrection of the dead, which was the very reason for his imprisonment. The Jewish leaders, intrigued by his words, expressed their desire to hear more, acknowledging that they had received no direct reports from Judea concerning him, nor had any of their brethren spoken ill of him. They admitted that they knew the sect of which he spoke was everywhere spoken against, but they were open to hearing his perspective firsthand. This initial openness, though cautious, filled Paul with hope, a potential bridge to his own people in the heart of the empire. On an appointed day, many of the Jewish leaders and their followers came to Paul's lodging, eager to hear his message. From morning until evening, Paul reasoned with them, patiently explaining the kingdom of God and seeking to persuade them about Jesus, drawing evidence from the law of Moses and the prophets. He spoke with passion and conviction, his voice resonating with the truth of the scriptures, his eyes alight with the fire of his faith. Some were convinced by what he said, their hearts softened and opened to the message of Christ, their faces reflecting a newfound understanding and hope. Others, however, remained skeptical, their minds hardened by tradition and prejudice, their expressions unyielding. As the day drew to a close, a lively debate ensued among them, their differing opinions creating a palpable tension in the room. Before they departed, Paul spoke one final, powerful word, quoting the prophet Isaiah, "The Holy Spirit was right in saying to your fathers through Isaiah the prophet, go to this people, and say, you will indeed hear but never understand, and you will indeed see but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. He then declared, with a solemn authority, "Therefore let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles, they will listen." With these words, the Jewish leaders departed, their minds undoubtedly wrestling with the profound implications of Paul's message. Paul, however, remained undeterred, his mission clear. For 2 whole years, he lived in that rented house, welcoming all who came to him, his door always open to seekers and believers alike. He continued to proclaim the kingdom of God with boldness and without hindrance, teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ, his words echoing through the heart of the Roman Empire, carried by visitors who came from far and wide. During this time, the small house became a vibrant center of Christian activity, a beacon of light in the vast pagan city. Letters flowed from his hand, carried by faithful messengers to distant churches he had founded, offering encouragement, guidance, and correction. These epistles, filled with profound theological insights and practical wisdom, would later become foundational texts for generations of believers, their words continuing to inspire and transform lives long after Paul's own earthly journey had ended. Luke, ever the diligent scribe, meticulously recorded Paul's sermons, his conversations, and the details of his daily life, ensuring that the story of this extraordinary apostle and the early church would be preserved for posterity. He observed Paul's unwavering patience, his profound wisdom, and his boundless love for all people, regardless of their background or beliefs. He saw firsthand the power of faith to transcend physical limitations and political obstacles, transforming a prisoner into a powerful messenger of hope. The centurion Julius, who had brought Paul to Rome, occasionally visited, his respect for Paul growing with each encounter. He witnessed the steady stream of visitors, the earnest discussions, and the palpable sense of peace that permeated Paul's humble dwelling. He saw a man who, despite his chains, was freer in spirit than many of the powerful figures in Rome, a man whose influence extended far beyond the walls of his rented house. Paul's days in Rome were a testament to his unwavering commitment to his divine calling. He lived simply, yet his life was rich with purpose and meaning. He found joy in fellowship, strength in prayer, and renewed determination in the face of adversity. The bustling sounds of Rome, the distant shouts of vendors, the clatter of chariots on the cobblestones, all faded into the background, becoming a gentle hum against the profound silence of his inner conviction. He was in Rome, a prisoner, yet he was free to fulfill his ultimate mission, to bear witness to the truth of Christ in the very heart of the empire, a living embodiment of God's steadfast provision and unwavering grace. The story of his journey, from the storm-tossed seas to the quiet confines of his Roman dwelling, was a powerful narrative of faith, resilience, and the enduring power of a divine plan. The memory of the storm, though months passed, still occasionally surfaced in Paul's mind, a vivid tableau of towering waves and splintering wood, a stark contrast to the relative calm of his Roman imprisonment, and he often found himself tracing the contours of that harrowing journey back to its tumultuous beginning, to the very moment the ship had run aground on the shores of Malta. The island, then known to some as Malta, had emerged from the tempestuous dawn like a salvation, a rugged silhouette against a sky still bruised with the departing storm, and the desperate scramble for shore had been a chaotic ballet of survival, each man clinging to a plank or a piece of wreckage, propelled by the relentless surge of the sea. Julius, the centurion, a man whose stern exterior often belied a deep sense of responsibility and a burgeoning respect for Paul, had watched with a mixture of relief and exhaustion as his charges, both soldiers and prisoners, stumbled onto the rocky beach, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken by the ordeal. He had seen many storms in his years of service, but none had possessed the raw, untamed fury of this one, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that their survival was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to something far beyond mere chance or human skill. He walked along the shoreline, his heavy boots crunching on the wet shingle, surveying the scattered remnants of their vessel, broken timbers, sodden ropes, and the occasional piece of cargo, all testament to the sea's destructive power, and he felt a profound weariness seep into his muscles, a fatigue born not just of physical exertion but of the sustained tension of days spent teetering on the precipice of oblivion. Luke, ever the meticulous observer, had already begun to sketch in his mind the details of their arrival, the way the waves had crashed against the shore, the cries of the men, the stark beauty of the island's rugged coastline, and he knew these moments would find their way into his chronicles, painted with the precise brushstrokes of an eyewitness. He watched Paul, who, despite the ordeal, moved with a quiet dignity, his gaze sweeping over the unfamiliar landscape, a landscape that, even in its wildness, seemed to offer a promise of respite, a temporary haven from the relentless pursuit of the Roman justice system and the unforgiving whims of the sea. Paul's face, though etched with the lines of recent hardship, held a profound serenity, a peace that emanated from a source far deeper than the temporary cessation of physical danger, and Luke often marveled at this unwavering inner strength, a beacon that had guided them through the darkest hours of the tempest. The air on Malta, though still damp from the recent downpour, carried a surprising warmth, a gentle promise of the Mediterranean sun that would soon break through the lingering clouds, and the scent of damp earth mingled with the briny tang of the sea, a comforting aroma after the suffocating confines of the ship's hold. The islanders, drawn by the commotion and the sight of the wrecked vessel, began to emerge from their scattered dwellings, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern, their simple garments fluttering in the soft breeze, and their initial apprehension soon gave way to an extraordinary display of human kindness. They were a people accustomed to the sea's unpredictable nature, to the harsh realities of life on a remote island, and their hearts were open to those who had suffered its wrath, recognizing in the shipwrecked strangers a shared vulnerability. One of the first to approach was a man named Publius, a leading citizen of the island, whose kind eyes and welcoming demeanor immediately put the weary travelers at ease, and he extended an invitation for them to take shelter in his home, a generous offer that spoke volumes of his compassionate spirit. His estate, nestled amidst rolling hills and fertile fields, offered a stark contrast to the desolate beach, a sanctuary of warmth and comfort, and the thought of dry clothes and a hot meal was a luxury almost unimaginable after their harrowing ordeal. The journey to Publius's home was a slow procession, the shipwrecked men, still weak and disoriented, leaning on each other for support, their footsteps heavy on the narrow, winding paths that crisscrossed the island. The landscape unfolded around them, a tapestry of ancient olive groves, terraced vineyards, and low-lying stone walls, all bathed in the soft, diffused light of the emerging sun, and the air grew sweeter with the scent of wild herbs and the distant murmur of the sea. As they walked, Paul observed the islanders, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their hands calloused from labor, and he noted their quiet resilience, their deep connection to the land and the sea that sustained them. He saw in their simple lives a profound dignity, a reflection of the universal human spirit that sought to find meaning and beauty even in the most challenging of circumstances, and he felt a stirring of gratitude for their unexpected hospitality. The island, though small, was rich in history, its ancient stones whispering tales of Phoenician traders, Greek settlers, and Roman conquerors, a crossroads of cultures in the heart of the Mediterranean, and Paul, with his keen mind and vast experience, could sense the layers of human endeavor embedded in its very soil. Upon reaching Publius's estate, a sense of profound relief washed over the weary travelers, and they were ushered into a spacious courtyard, surrounded by whitewashed walls and fragrant flowering plants, a haven of peace after the tumult of the sea. The warmth of a roaring fire, kindled by the thoughtful islanders, quickly dispelled the lingering chill from their bones, and its flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the faces of the men, revealing the exhaustion etched into their features, but also the dawning hope in their eyes. The crackling wood released a comforting scent into the air, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread and warming stews that the women of the household had already begun to prepare, a feast for their famished bodies and weary souls. Paul, ever practical, had joined the islanders in gathering wood for the bonfire, a task that offered a welcome distraction from the lingering tremors of the sea, and as he reached into a pile of brushwood, a viper, roused by the warmth of the flames and the sudden disturbance, suddenly lashed out, fastening itself onto his hand. A gasp rippled through the onlookers, their faces paling with alarm, for they knew the venomous nature of the island snakes, and a hush fell over the group, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the frantic beating of their own hearts. The islanders, steeped in their local beliefs and superstitions, immediately concluded that Paul must be a murderer, a man whose past transgressions had finally caught up with him, and they whispered among themselves that divine justice, though delayed by the sea, had now found its way to him on land. Yet, Paul, with a calm born of unwavering faith, simply shook the creature off into the fire, his movements deliberate and unhurried, as if swatting away a troublesome fly, and he felt no pain, no burning sensation, no sign of the venom that should have coursed through his veins. The islanders watched, their eyes wide with disbelief, expecting him to swell up, to collapse, to succumb to the deadly poison, but as minutes turned into a quarter of an hour, and then longer, Paul remained unharmed, his composure undisturbed, his gaze steady and clear. Their whispers shifted from condemnation to awe, their superstitious fears giving way to a profound wonder, and they began to declare that he must be a god, a divine being sent from the heavens, a powerful spirit walking among them. Luke, who had witnessed countless miracles through Paul's ministry, felt a surge of quiet affirmation, another testament to the protective hand of God, and he made a mental note of the incident, knowing it would serve as a powerful illustration of divine providence in his future writings. Julius, the centurion, though a man of the Roman world, where gods and omens were part of daily life, found himself increasingly perplexed and deeply impressed by Paul's extraordinary resilience and the inexplicable events that seemed to surround him, and he knew that this prisoner was unlike any other he had ever encountered, a man whose power seemed to stem from an unseen, unyielding force. The incident with the viper, far from being a setback, served to deepen the islanders' respect and admiration for Paul, opening their hearts even further to his presence, and it paved the way for a series of remarkable events that would unfold during their 3-month stay on the island. Publius, whose generosity had already been boundless, approached Paul with a troubled expression, explaining that his father lay gravely ill, afflicted with a fever and dysentery, a common and often fatal ailment on the island, and his voice was heavy with concern, his eyes pleading for help. Paul, without hesitation, accompanied Publius to his father's bedside, a quiet room filled with the hushed anxiety of the family, and he knelt beside the ailing man, his hand gently resting on the feverish brow. He prayed, not with ostentation or theatrical flourish, but with a quiet intensity, a deep communion with the divine source of all healing, and as he prayed, a profound peace seemed to settle over the room, a tangible sense of God's presence. Then, with a simple touch, he laid his hands upon the man, and almost immediately, the fever began to subside, the labored breathing eased, and the color returned to the old man's pallid face, a miraculous transformation that left the family speechless with gratitude and wonder. News of this extraordinary healing spread like wildfire across the island, carried by excited whispers and fervent declarations, and soon, people from all corners of Malta, afflicted with various diseases and infirmities, began to flock to Publius's estate, seeking Paul's touch, his prayers, his miraculous intervention. Paul, with tireless compassion, attended to each one, offering solace, healing, and the message of hope that was the very core of his being, and he spent his days moving among the sick, his hands laying upon them, his words of comfort and faith echoing in the quiet rooms. He did not seek glory for himself, but always pointed to the true source of the power, to the God who worked through him, and his humility only deepened the islanders' reverence for him, cementing their belief in his divine connection. The atmosphere on Publius's estate transformed from a place of quiet suffering into a vibrant hub of healing and hope, a testament to the transformative power of faith and compassion, and the air buzzed with stories of recovery, of renewed strength, of lives touched by the miraculous. During these weeks, as the island slowly healed, both physically and spiritually, Paul found moments of quiet reflection amidst the constant stream of visitors, and he would often walk along the rugged cliffs overlooking the azure Mediterranean, the vast expanse of the sea, a constant reminder of his journey and his ultimate purpose. He pondered the intricate tapestry of God's plan, how even the most catastrophic events, like a shipwreck, could be woven into a larger design for good, how adversity could become a pathway to new opportunities, new ministries, new connections with people who desperately needed to hear the message of Christ. The gentle breeze, carrying the scent of salt and wild thyme, whispered secrets of ancient mariners and forgotten gods, but Paul's heart was fixed on a different truth, a truth that transcended the transient beliefs of men and the shifting tides of history. He often spoke with Luke during these quiet times, sharing his thoughts on the nature of faith, the challenges of ministry, and the profound mystery of God's unwavering love, and Luke, ever the diligent scribe, absorbed every word, every nuance, storing them away for the sacred task of chronicling Paul's extraordinary life. They would sit together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and the silence between them was not empty but filled with a shared understanding, a deep spiritual camaraderie forged in the crucible of shared trials and triumphs. Julius, too, though often preoccupied with his duties, found himself drawn to these conversations, listening intently to Paul's words, his Roman pragmatism slowly yielding to a growing sense of wonder and curiosity about this God who could calm storms and heal the sick. The centurion had witnessed firsthand Paul's unwavering courage in the face of death, his calm assurance during the tempest, and now, his selfless compassion for the suffering, and these experiences chipped away at his ingrained skepticism, planting seeds of doubt about the supremacy of the Roman pantheon. He began to see Paul not just as a prisoner, but as a man of profound conviction and extraordinary power, a man whose life was guided by a force he could not fully comprehend but could no longer deny, and he felt a subtle shift within himself, a softening of his hardened military resolve, a dawning awareness of something greater than the empire he served. He would often observe Paul interacting with the islanders, his patience, his kindness, his genuine concern for their well-being, and he recognized in Paul a true leader, not by rank or decree, but by the sheer force of his character and the undeniable presence of the divine within him. As the weeks turned into months, the island of Malta became a temporary sanctuary, a place of unexpected blessings and profound spiritual growth, not only for Paul and his companions but also for the islanders themselves, whose lives were touched by the message of hope and healing. The shipwreck, which had initially seemed like a devastating catastrophe, had transformed into a divine appointment, a strategic detour in Paul's journey to Rome, allowing him to plant seeds of faith in a new land, to demonstrate the power of God in a way that words alone could never convey. The islanders, who had initially viewed them as unfortunate castaways, now saw them as messengers of a higher power, their hearts open to the truth that Paul so passionately proclaimed, and the bonds of hospitality had deepened into bonds of genuine affection and spiritual kinship. When the time came for them to depart, after 3 months of unexpected grace, the islanders, filled with gratitude and sorrow at their leaving, showered Paul and his companions with provisions, ensuring they would have everything they needed for the remainder of their journey, and they loaded their newly acquired ship, an Alexandrian vessel named the Castor and Pollux, with gifts of food, clothing, and other necessities, a tangible expression of their love and appreciation. The farewell was a poignant one, marked by heartfelt embraces and tearful goodbyes, a testament to the deep connections forged in a short but impactful time, and as the ship pulled away from the harbor, the islanders stood on the shore, waving until the vessel was but a distant speck on the horizon, their hearts filled with memories of the man who had brought healing and hope to their remote island. Paul stood on the deck, watching the receding coastline of Malta, his heart filled with a quiet gratitude for the unexpected interlude, for the kindness of strangers, for the miraculous provision of God in every circumstance, and he knew that this chapter, like all the others, was an essential part of the larger narrative, a testament to the unwavering faithfulness of his Lord. The sea, now calm and sparkling under the Mediterranean sun, seemed to whisper promises of the journey ahead, a journey that would eventually lead him to Rome, to the very heart of the empire, where his ultimate mission awaited, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet strength that emanated from the depths of his unwavering faith. The gentle sway of the ship, the rhythmic lapping of the waves against the hull, and the vast, open expanse of the sea before him, all conspired to create a profound sense of peace, a tranquil anticipation of the next chapter in his extraordinary life, a life lived entirely in the service of a divine calling. The story settles now, like dust after a long journey. Thank you for listening. If you find peace here, we would love to have you back. Tap subscribe so the next story finds you. Until then, sleep deeply and wake rested.